Thank you to Manscaped for sponsoring this video. I was so excited for Watch Dogs Legion. And yeah, that seemed kind of insane in a year stacked with Cyberpunk, Ghost of Tsushima, and The Last of Us 2. But here's the thing, I am insane. Also, Legion was the sequel to Watch Dogs 2, and Watch Dogs 2 was great. Not that the mass market cared in the titanic wake of the first game's infamous release, when a hype train propelled to supersonic speeds by deceptive marketing and outright lies met an iron wall whose name was reality. That Watch Dogs, in many ways, was just okay. For that, Ubisoft would not be forgiven. So, no one bought the sequel. No one really wanted to give it the credit it was due. But Watch Dogs 2 did an astoundingly good job of unmidding Watch Dogs. The story wasn't boring. The driving was much improved. The multiplayer seamlessly integrated with the single player, in general. Not just through PvP invasions. Hacking, once relegated to a thin and unimaginative selection of single-purpose conveniences, was now a far broader sandbox, both in the sense that there was far more to hack, and in the sense that hacks could do more. Traps once fixed in position were now yours to place, and they could attach to things, like vehicles, which were now yours to move. You could activate them manually, or with a proximity sensor, and it was this that allowed you to have multiple things happen at the same time. It was the quadcopter's manipulable point of view that made intricate, creative plans more accessible, and it was Marcus's vulnerability that encouraged it. Watch Dogs was actually a hacking game now, and through hacking we had vastly more control over the way we approached an encounter. But for me, the highlight of the gameplay was the AI. Watch Dogs 2 made an unusually strong commitment to creating emergent gameplay with large, dynamic AI interactions. Basically, with gangs. There were a lot of them. One of them was the police, and they all hated each other. And they'd get into fights on their own, but you could provide some encouragement, either by literally leading them to conflict, or with hacks that planted false evidence. Sometimes the enemy faction was a Karen and a different Karen, because this even applied to random NPCs, who had simulated personalities and a broad range of responses. The police would show up to crimes, people might resist arrest, the police would respond. Watch Dogs 2's AI made things happen. It brought life to the world and variation to the gameplay. It made memories. Ubisoft called it the Anecdote Factory, and it seemed they thought as highly of it as I did. The question that inspired Legion, according to Clint Hocking, its esteemed director, was, what if every character was an open world? From anecdotes to stories, he said. The pre-release material spoke of fully simulated scheduled lives, and what a style the game seemed to have. And it was set in the future. Imagine what that could mean for a hacking game. You can make someone's dick fall off with an iPhone app. I'm telling you this because I want you to know it wasn't insane to be hyped. Legion was the sequel to Watch Dogs 2, and I was so excited to see what they would do next, to see this franchise finally meet its full potential. So, I did what I said I would. The day after uploading the last review, I played Watch Dogs Legion for the first time, and I was amazed at how disappointing the intro was. They're going for a James Bond thing. You're Dalton, like Timothy Dalton, dressed in a slick suit, here to save Parliament from a bomb plot. Unfortunately, he hasn't quite got Bond's charisma, or his budget. The music was drab, the environments were drab, the level was linear, and they sort of forgot to do anything with the hacking. Then Zero Day showed up, and Ubisoft had one job: get me invested. Mystery, menace, a theme, so much as a fucking idea. Instead, we're treated to a generic villain's speech made of rambling, incoherent nonsense. To console Dalton for what's about to happen, Zero Day, as if making an enlightening revelation, reminds him that Londoners have died before. Like, before now, some people who lived in London died. He then goes on to explain that dying horribly won't be very fun, but destruction is always the cure. The cure for what? No, you can't just shoot me. Zero Day? The cure for what? The problem is, the introduction has no hook. Dalton seems nice, I didn't want him to die, but there's no meat on the bone of his character, nor anyone in DedSec, and I didn't know anyone at the bomb sites. Zero Day comes across as unintelligent, and worse, uninspired, and the mystery of his identity is all this game now has to go on. Not a great start, but at least it's quick, and now we're loose in London, with DedSec to rebuild, and this time, I really was amazed, well, for a while. Legion's NPC tech is remarkable, and there is a very real pleasure in simply checking it out. It's new to be able to follow a pedestrian through their scheduled lives, and for that scheduled life to be reasonably convincing. You can actually observe a day in the life of a true Brexit geezer. They have jobs, they entertain themselves, they work out, they grieve, they sleep. They have relationships with different NPCs, both good and bad, and you can use time skips to watch this happen without a long wait. How's this possible? Good question. It isn't. The truth is, before you cared to look, they were a standard hollow NPC. It's only when you pay attention that a schedule gains its detail. It's a trick, but it's not a bad one, because it's always real when you want it to be. From anecdotes to stories. If a person's life is a story, then in a sense, Hawking's vision is realized. But before long, the novelty of the tech wears off. What if you want to do more than just look at a life? More than follow a schedule? What if you want it to mean something to the game? Those are also good questions. I wish somebody at Ubisoft had asked them, because the answer is, you can't. As a DedSec recruiter, what I'm trying to do to a person is help them. But besides shooting them or hitting them with a car, it's pretty hard to do anything. An NPC's scheduled events and relationships are not meaningfully interactable things. If someone's in mourning or having trouble at work or cheating on a spouse, there's nothing I can do. More broadly, there are no tools or hacks or conversational abilities that allow us to interface with a person. There are none. Which impressively means there are fewer than previous Watch Dogs games. You can't hack banks anymore. You can't hack texts or phone calls. You can't plant evidence. Here's what you can do. If you stumble upon an Albion shakedown, you can save the victims by pressing the quick hack button on the guard, which will make them easier to recruit. That is a good thing, but it's about as minor as a good thing can be. And because it's the only example, you'll start seeing people who you happen to know in this exact situation over and over and over again, so it'll quickly stop feeling organic too. Considering this exception, my point is simple. There's no game here. None of it was designed with a player in mind, only an observer. Instead, recruitment in Watch Dogs Legion is performed by completing a prescribed task. It could be a recruitment mission, in which we're sent to a small arena to hack or shoot something, or a recruitment lead, in which we're pretty much always sent to a small arena to hack or shoot something. They're very repetitive, they're very boring, and they are as flat in terms of fantasy as they are in terms of play. You don't get to be the hacker detective. You get to be an errand boy, thoughtlessly driving from repeated task to repeated task. Tasks that, as you will soon discover, are almost completely disconnected from the recruit's life as we see it in-game. Just like the detail in a schedule, the problems we're sent to solve in recruitment missions are simply invented the moment we ask. Likewise, recruitment leads, which you'll find above their schedule, aren't reflected in the schedule, or in any information we can find about the recruit. The one exception to this rule is also the exception to the gameplay formula, when you're asked to hurt a competitor or an investigator on the streets of London, which is an actual part of their scheduled life. And an idea with a lot of potential. I imagined we might have to account for use of force, something the first game employed to great success, or perhaps avoid being too violent in front of our prospect. But we don't. So you can just time skip, plow a fucking bus into them on sight, and immediately receive thanks from your recruit, not seeming at all upset that they just witnessed the brutal and unsolicited murder of someone they kinda just found annoying.
We're being contacted by our potential recruit. Patching them through now.
Anything you need, just say the word.
It's completely brain dead on the mechanical end, and comically stupid on the narrative end. Millions of dollars, years of work, and for what? For systems that can only afford the pleasure of looking at them? Well, I admit, I enjoyed being able to run over people's romantic partners when they cheesed me off, but most players aren't quite that psychotic, and I was hoping for something more finished. It'd be weak on the basis of failing Legion's vision alone, but this is also the sequel to Watch Dogs 2. With that game in mind, here's the funny part. They took out police APB. They removed the tendency of factions to fight, they massively lessened the tendency of citizens to fight, and they massively lessened the tendency of the police to respond to such crimes. Yes, in a police state, presumably because they wanted to avoid valuable NPCs randomly getting killed outside of the player's control. So nothing happens, so I don't have anecdotes. Infinitely more complex technology has amounted to an infinitely less interesting game. But hey, just because the recruitment process fails doesn't mean we can't get attached to our recruits as characters. They're our recruits after all. That should mean something, right? I'm sorry guys. The moment someone joins DedSec, everything that characterized their life simply stops. They don't have loved ones anymore. They don't have jobs. And I don't mean in mechanical terms. I mean like a phone call. Any aesthetic detail to make you believe that you're inhabiting a person, not overwriting them. Expect nothing better from the recruitment process. Leads aren't going to help. They're too detached, too stupid, or both. And the narrative context for the recruitment missions suck almost just as much as the gameplay. Problem 1, the involvement of the recruit themselves. They're only there to tell you what's troubling them and to thank you for fixing it. Sometimes you get the vigilante recruitment, where they're directly involved and you find them in the action, but usually they're absent, and so have no chance to be characterized. Then there's the problems of what problem specifically that we're being sent to solve. Most of the time, it's help me delete my life's work, because my boss is selling the patent to Albion, find out why I was fired and replaced by an AI, or my friends being held in a Clan Kelly/Albion detainment camp. Please break them out. There are two immediate problems with this. One, even the problems don't involve the recruits. They tell us nothing about the person beyond that they don't like obviously bad things happening. And number two is that solving these problems wouldn't justify anyone resigning their entire lives to DedSec. It's not that they aren't big problems, it's the fact that we solve them, which means our operatives can only be motivated by either a sense of debt to DedSec or by the belief that joining DedSec can make a real difference. Debt and idealism. That's it. And I think that's a big fuck up, both because they're not very interesting as motives go, but also because they're just not very believable applied to the entire population of a city. Half of London has a moral conviction strong enough to expose themselves and their families to a high chance of being killed, and the other half is taking the same risk solely because a shady hacker collective did them a solid. There isn't a single person in London who isn't fundamentally good. We never have to impose or threaten or buy someone off, which seems especially strange in a game that heavily encourages you to play as exceedingly violent people. The instinctual response to this criticism might be that it's unreasonable to expect true believability from a system like this, but all I'm asking for is something better than consistently bad, and I think they could have gotten much closer with only the smallest of changes. Like I said, the problem is the fact that we solve them. What if we didn't? Or at least not completely? Albion murders a member of their family. We can offer them revenge. Someone's been blacklisted from employment. Their only hope to avoid the streets and clear the slate is with us. How about guilt? We show a low-level Clan Kelly goon the extent of their organ ring. See what I mean? Operatives that carry powerful wants and needs with them into DedSec, instead of having their problems cleared beforehand, are both vastly more convincing and more interesting. And if they died, there'd be a note of tragedy in their failure that wouldn't otherwise exist. It would be better, which wouldn't be hard. So, would you believe me if I told you the void of excitement, character, and basic logic in the recruitment process isn't the biggest problem with the recruits? Nope, that'd be the way they speak.
British people be like,
"You're hench, mate."
British people be like,
big up some boot in Albion's arse all over the ends.
British people get mad and be like,
I'm also tough tits.
Fuck a duck on an ice cream truck, man. I don't even know where to begin. The simplest problem is the voice acting.
Some of that nice fancy shit that Clan Kelly sells ought to do the trick, yeah?
All right, we look into it.
It can't have been easy to direct a game with 12 trillion possible interactions, but Legion is riddled with line delivery that wouldn't sound natural in any context, that is just bad.
These fucking pricks are using aversion therapy on people. They're literally realigning their brains.
No, sorry, one of our friends disappeared from the EPC. His trail led me here.
Whoa, fuck me. Ripping off San Fran's whole thing, yeah?
Another fairly simple problem is that the dialogue has a tendency to be what the kids call cringe. Sometimes it's a matter of trying too hard with the dialects, which comes across as forced.
And she just starts beating the fuck out of them proper hench gangsters.
I'm also tough tits.
But a lot of the time, it's a much stranger problem, that people have a tendency to talk as if this was a game with a younger target audience.
Who would do that? That is not what DedSec stands for. What the hell?
You know those shows we used to watch when we were kids that had protagonists who were innately good, morally idealistic, and spoke with wide-eyed wonder? There's a lot of that in anime. Not that I know, obviously. Point is, for reasons I cannot even begin to imagine, you can see some of that in Legion.
DedSec's always looking for gutsy people. You'd fit right in. Wanna join?
Nearly everyone, even the most abrasive recruits in the game, are ultimately moral idealists, and they have a tendency to announce it in very shonen ways.
Now I wake up every morning with a fire in my belly to fight for London, together.
There's even a tendency to hear that wide-eyed delivery.
That doesn't sound good. She needs our help.
You'll often hear things like, DedSec, fuck yeah, that was awesome, go Bagley. You'll often hear them refer to the bad guys as bad guys.
So who are the real bad guys? DedSec is like London's #1 enemy. I want to smash bad guys, but I joined DedSec to find bad guys and smash their heads.
In general, many of the voices are very light-hearted, very upbeat.
Don't worry, I get it. The clock tower represents a lot. It's London's history. We need to protect it. It represents our parliamentary democracy. To have Albion to face it the way they did, it's clear what they were up to. Thank you, DedSec.
And that default state never changes even slightly, no matter what they see or do. And yeah, it does seem a bit ridiculous, unsettling even, in a game with subject matter as consistently dark as this, in a game where it's highly likely you're committing extreme acts of violence on a routine basis, and in a game which, when played on default settings, heavily encourages you to play as hardened, experienced people like hitmen and spies. Let me just say that again. In a game where your character is instantly converted to a moral idealist the moment they join DedSec, you're heavily encouraged to play as professional murderers and intelligence officers. Fantastic. Well done, Ubisoft. Voices don't account for profession whatsoever, so the best way this manifests is with outright contradictions.
I need you to help me get revenge on a very bad man.
You might have the wrong idea about us. We're not goons.
It's okay. I do not like killing. I was car thief.
Hitmen who condemn murder.
Just reading Sky Larson's obituary. Finally, a good news story amongst the shit.
Hey, a woman is dead.
Bloodthirsty maniacs with anxiety problems.
I'm riddled with anxiety right now.
What's wrong?
Just seems like our enemies are everywhere and too much to handle.
James Bond who thinks it's all just too much.
To be honest, things have gotten rather hairy. People are saying they might have gotten in too deep. I just want us to do the right thing all the time, you know?
The narrative context for recruitment missions don't account for profession either, so you get John Wicks who for some reason need your help with a bunch of street thugs. When Legion's recruits work, things are tolerable. Worst problem you'll have is a weak delivery. But when they don't, which is often, it can get bad, because it can be impossible to take anything they touch seriously.
Fuck yes! DedSec puts the saving the day in Vigilante.
I'm also tough tits.
I don't want to overstate the problem, but unless you start actively screening new recruits for their voices, this can fuck the game so hard, the force of its cheeks getting clapped could be read on a seismometer.
Wagwan, you're DedSec, innit? Yeah, I can tell. You got that hard look, yeah?
So, no, we don't get attached. We don't view them as characters. If you're lucky, boring is all they are. And what's left? Well, what's left is how they play. Is there a meaningful difference between the experience of playing as one recruit over another? Depends on what you mean by meaningful. Some recruits fart, which is cool if you're into that. Okay, I'll be fair. Some recruits have strong guns, some recruits have weak guns, and that is an impactful distinction. Some have cooldown gadgets that make melee takedowns easier to access during combat. Hitmen have gun catakills, but because every recruit can perform executions on stunned enemies, and hitmen will usually stun to get into melee range, gun kata is usually mechanically redundant. Personal vehicles are a neat idea, but they only represent a minor convenience on the very rare occasions that you can't immediately find something as fast or faster on the streets. Recruits who worked for an enemy faction can use their outfits to blend into restricted areas, but again, it's uniform over unifunction. You have to walk. You can't crouch, which can actually make avoiding detection harder than it would otherwise be, and it's almost certain that stealth will be slower. Similarly, the getaway driver's clear the way ability can make getting away harder, because it makes the roads less predictable. Drone experts can make drones switch allegiance, but everyone can do that once you unlock it from the skill tree, and until then it isn't worth using a character with bad weapons. And in terms of anything worth mentioning, that's your lot. And it is a lot, but what's consistent is that these are incredibly minor things. Gun strength matters. Besides that, these abilities are an occasional convenience. There are no significant differences in health that would heavily encourage the use of stealth over combat, or serious handicaps in certain regions like not being able to drive properly, or shitting themselves in fear when detected, or aiming like T-off Tony in The Last of Us. Ultimately, what this means is that Play as Anyone fails in its most anticipated function, to provide variety. So, strike one. But what about the Legion side of things? Can recruits work as a team? No. A simple answer for an absolute truth. You can't control multiple operatives in the same instance of gameplay. You can't have a sniper up on a roof while your hitman goes in, and a getaway driver leaves the engine running. The degree to which you can't do this is so absolute that it completely undermines the entire purpose of certain types of recruit. What? And I cannot emphasize this enough, the fuck is the point in a getaway driver if the getaway driver is also the one who has to do the mission itself, or a medic with no one to heal? So guess what happens? You never use them. And it's not just that you can't control them, you can't even summon them. At the very least, it would be cool to summon a driver in the same way we call a vehicle on demand. Or a medic for some heals. Maybe if you go down, they try to revive you. Maybe you could call a hitman for combat, get your sniper to take someone out. Maybe a protest leader could show up and start a fight. Or, I don't know, maybe you could call your police officers to arrest people, with the ability we already had in Watch Dogs 2. The campaign is no more interested in making Legion mean something than the sandbox. There are no Mass Effect suicide missions, no GTA heists, where multiple operatives could be assigned to scripted roles. And the more you think about this, the weirder it gets. It's not like team systems are foreign to Ubisoft. Ghost Recon Wildlands allowed you to seamlessly switch between squad mates and synchronize shots. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood had a Brotherhood, who you could summon to assist in either combat or stealth. Far Cry 6 had summonable vehicles. Several games have had allied factions in them. But if you find an allied operative on the streets in Legion, they immediately forget their combat training and their loyalty to DedSec, and they'll flee or cower from enemies. What the fuck are you doing, Danielle? Chuck your fucking briefcase at them! One of the things I was really looking forward to before release was the idea of recruiting a member of an enemy faction and then having an inside man. Go ahead, try it. They'll just attack you. Now, some operatives do bring passive team benefits. Doctors and barristers shorten operative recovery times on death, which is not nothing. But it's pretty close to nothing, in one sense because it doesn't work on any of the permadeath modes, in another sense because shortening recovery times is the only type of team benefit. Having a politician in DedSec does nothing. Having someone at the top of the corporate ladder in DedSec does nothing. Having an influencer in DedSec or anyone otherwise famous does nothing. Even having someone with loads of money doesn't do anything. Perhaps because there's nothing to buy besides clothes. You can't buy weapons or vehicles anymore to be shared amongst the team. So you're not actually profiling the citizens of London for how much value they'll be to DedSec, you're profiling them for how good they'll be in a fight. Because gun strength is essentially the only thing that makes a difference, people with decent guns will probably be decent operatives, and people without them probably won't. And that's it. That's all that matters, because Watch Dogs Legion fundamentally lacks the capacity for people to act beyond themselves. Right. What I'd like to talk about next is your balls. I think you need to hack your balls, because your balls smell.
Ew.
What a shame. It doesn't matter how much you think they don't smell. You think you can sit down for hours per day and not come out with gamer groin? You think if Serana was real, she'd want to hang around with some gamer groin smelling ass bitch? No. It's time to refresh your balls. The comprehensive solution is the Performance Package 4.0 from Manscaped. No faff or hassle. It's everything you need in one box. The number one reason for the ball smell problem are your masses of gamer pubes that trap sweat and gamer bacteria, which the Lawnmower 4.0 addresses head on. It's waterproof, which means it's showerproof, and its skin-safe technology means it's unlikely to remove your gamer balls as well. If your ears or nose are causing problems too, there's a weed whacker included, and for a limited time you also get a pair of anti-chafing microfiber briefs, which are more important than you might think. Your balls chafe, don't they? Don't lie to me. That creates friction, heat, and sweat. The briefs come with a remarkably nice travel bag too. And if you're in need of a shorter-term solution, that'll be Manscaped's Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant and Toner. They smell great, feel good, and are easy to apply. My balls don't smell, and yours don't need to either. Go to manscaped.com and use code Whitelight for 20% off, free shipping, and 2 free gifts. Anyway, it's a real shame that operatives fall so flat, because if not play as anyone or the idea of Legion itself, what exactly is going to fill this game's vast mechanical void? Did I forget to mention? Yeah, half of the Watch Dogs gameplay sandbox is gone. It's immediately noticeable when you search your pockets. You can now only carry one thing that isn't a gun. So if you want a robot, you can't have a grenade. If you want a cloak, which you probably do because it's demonstrably the best gadget in the game, you can't have a trap. So you're always playing with less. It's easy to misinterpret this as an attempt to create differentiation, but when you're outside a restricted area, you can switch your gadgets whenever you like. So how does it create differentiation? It's just limitation. And here's the cool part. You can't hack anything anymore. Gang APB and police APB are gone. You can't hack people's grenades. You can't blackout. You can't perform any kind of mass hack. You can't hack fixed elements of the levels themselves, like elevators or spinny things or car alarms or radios or solar panels or anything more inventive. Things that, in spite of their small mechanical role, made you feel like a hacker, in control of your environment as if by magic. You've still got Vehicle Hack, that's a win. Vehicle Hack was and remains a brilliant mechanic, but the tightness of the levels makes its uses more infrequent, and the de-emphasis of the sticky trap means its potential for combinations has plummeted. Even something as simple and brain-dead as the instant knockout electric panels and gas pipes have somehow managed to regress, because of the removal of Botnet. Botnet was your hack battery, and with it, Watch Dogs 2 was able to impose balance. If you proximity hacked a trap, it would cost more Botnet than if you hacked the trap manually, because activating the trap manually requires your continued attention. Balance. Legion, however, works on a cooldown system, and the cooldown for proximity hack is very small, which means there's no incentive not to use it, which means the average experience of hacking the one thing there is to hack in most stealth arenas is pressing the quick hack button, then ignoring it in the hopes it nets you a free kill. Balance across the board has plummeted. Scissor lifts, window lifts, and cranes still exist, and they're still cool to use, but the cargo drone, which is never hard to find, literally allows you to fucking fly and skip open-air levels. I self-restricted, but it's not ideal that I had to. The big balance issue, however, and by big I'm talking like Virgo supercluster, is that even if the hacking sandbox still existed, none of it, besides the simplest uses of instant kill panels, are ever worth trying to do. Legion is easy, and it was the ways Watch Dogs 2 was not easy that encouraged you to use tools and methods besides Marcus's body. Detection was very harsh, and Marcus was very vulnerable. In Legion, neither of these things are true. There's rarely a reason to avoid combat, and detection range is now so absurdly forgiving that enemies are practically blind. I've had times where I honestly thought my game was broken. Detection propagation, meanwhile, which is how readily it spreads to other enemies, is so weak that you can be spotted, fully detected, and in the midst of a fucking fistfight, and everyone else will be none the wiser. And then there's your selection of get-out-of-jail-free cards. Enemies can still be distracted in any situation, and we now have an invisibility cloak, which both allows you to reposition and to hit the instant takedown. What this adds up to is a game where the best strategy is to simply throw yourself into the arena, hitting melee takedowns one by one, with little regard for positioning or caution or being a hacker. There's no reason to do anything else, and almost no potential to, even if there was. It's dull. It's repetitive. It's less like Watch Dogs and more like other well-established stealth systems, like Shadow of Mordor's and Assassin's Creed, which only serves to further its lack of excitement. You've played this before. And amazingly, it's not the end of this conversation, because they've also removed most of the enemies that you couldn't just melee take down, those being the security systems. In Watch Dogs 2, cameras could be avoided by timing your movement or with the disable hack. But the disable hack took a while to get, and moving wasn't always so simple in practice, so it was often worth temporarily stunning them with the stun gun. At times, especially in places where the cameras didn't move, this could create an interesting one-way dynamic, a risk-reward, because you could usually only hit the camera from one side. In Legion, you find its control panel, which is always nearby, and turn it off permanently in less than 5 seconds. In Watch Dogs 2, laser grids could also be temporarily stunned with some careful aim, or circumvented with a robot. In Legion, you find its control panel, which is always nearby, and turn it off permanently in less than 5 seconds. I found one exception to this, but there are basically no exceptions. And I kinda need to let that sink in, because it can be hard to believe that Ubisoft would weaken this mechanic to the point that it might as well not exist. But that's exactly what they've done. Enjoy your melee takedowns. It's a good thing then that there's a large animation set, that they're all pretty cool, and that different recruits have different animation sets to reflect their training. But the thing is, some don't. Some recruits only have 1 or 2 animations, which ends up being one of the most significant imbalances in the recruitment system, because it makes those recruits almost unplayable. It's cool that the hypnotist can brand enemies against their mates, but there's only so many times I can tolerate the exact same yo-yo swing, which is about 3. Any more than that, I'm the one you're putting to sleep. Recruits with stun guns and the DJ have the same problem. Looks good, but not 300 times in a row. The cherry on top for stealth is Legion's new access keys. In this game, they block access to no more than one door, and require a long download time to retrieve. Perhaps the idea was to create moments of tension. You'd need to be exposed for an extended period of time. I have played this game for over 100 hours. That has never happened, because it's likely you'll have taken out a majority of enemies before you even find the key or what the key opens, and because detection is so forgiving regardless. What has almost always happened is that the download only served to waste my time. There is no tension. Here, or anywhere in stealth, there are fewer options and fewer reasons to use the ones you have. There's no variety, and no sense we're playing as hackers. It's simplistic, flat, and repetitive. It's as colossal a step down from Watch Dogs 2 as I could imagine, and it's barely outdone by what happened to combat. This won't take long. Guns sound weak and lack impact. You have access to vanishingly few options, be it weapons, hacks, or grenades, and chances are good you won't have any grenades at all. Combat is flat in terms of character and fantasy, because hacks, nethack, and slow-mo have been de-emphasized, if not outright removed. The only way to push combat to the high end of mediocrity is to play it as aggressively as you can, balancing out your stun hacks to safely use those gun catter takedowns. There is a level of John Wick fantasy to be had here. That's faint fucking praise. Combat is also really easy. One of the reasons it's easy is that you have so much health. Another is that there just aren't many enemies in any given fight, because the levels are small. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my biggest singular problem with the gameplay of Watch Dogs Legion. The levels, they're small, they're unambitious, and for a good long while I made nothing of it. I was mostly doing recruitment missions and I was only early in the campaign, so I thought I'd just have to wait for Legion to bring out the Blooms and the Tiduses. So I waited, and nothing changed. So I took matters into my own hands. I found Bloom and Tidus on the map. I found dull, characterless corporate offices, 3 rooms large. They're all small and unambitious. Which isn't to say they're bad, but they do get kinda boring, which is a big step down from some of the most not boring levels in the AAA scene. Repetition is the big problem. Every type of content is using the same type of levels. There's no range of difficulty, of scale. There's no contrast, no highs and lows that each pace out the other. And so the loop of Legion is flattened. The game's routine is boring. This is compounded on by the fact that there are no measures in place to diversify the levels used by recruitment missions. There were more than 10 I had never seen until long after the credits, and more than 10 I had seen numerous times before. It's compounded on by the fact that the gameplay itself is also extremely repetitive, and it really could have done with a help. It's compounded on by the fact that there is almost nothing but this. Again, hard to believe. This is a Ubisoft game. Having a lot in them is kinda their thing. Well, there isn't a lot in Legion, by AAA standards, by Watch Dogs standards. The first game was hardly celebrated for its gameplay variety, but London makes Chicago look like a Super Mario world. Through criminal convoys and various campaign objectives, preparation for incoming enemies was a consistent theme and effectively invited creative planning. Some objectives expected you to account for use of force on particular targets amongst a group, which, given your mostly lethal arsenal, was another effective change. Watch Dogs was willing to employ the open world, which meant car chases and fights in the street. They could even dynamically emerge from simple encounters as targets tried to escape. And fighting in the streets wasn't just a change of scenery. It was more explosive. It often involved multiple factions because the police showed up, and it usually put innocents in danger, which mattered because of the rat mechanic, and allowed you to use the rescue mechanic. It was different in terms of fantasy and play. Watch Dogs Legion is not. It is not willing to employ the open world, and that's not because it doesn't have the mechanics. In fact, thanks to unlimited vehicle hack, Legion could have had the most interesting traffic fights in the series. Just force one to happen with the police to see for yourself. You can use vehicles to hit enemies, to expose enemies using them as cover, or to create your own cover. Carefully controlling a car to get in close for a takedown is as deep and as hacky as Legion can be, and I would absolutely expect the average player to pick up on that if Legion wasn't so committed to keeping combat contained within the bounds of its arenas. By the end, I would have settled for a fucking trailing mission. There isn't a lot in Legion, and you might just wish there was even less. Borough liberations. Sound familiar? It's the same idea as Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Do a handful of simple tasks in each region of the map to free them from oppression. Well, it sounds pretty mid to be honest, but it'll sound even midder when I tell you that in Legion, those tasks are things like press F on a person or take a picture, and when I remind you that this is happening in the same places that the rest of the game is happening. You've probably been here before. Now, when the tasks are done, you unlock a liberation mission, and these aren't bad. You get to jump about in Big Ben, you get to use a drone as a torch to light a path, you get to do a race. They're not bad. They're not that great though. In a game with meaningful side content, farting about with a spider bot would be a cool little distraction. In a game with more than one race, the game's one race wouldn't be refreshing. And yes, Legion went to the trouble of developing race mechanics only to stop at one. But hey, that's Legion on a normal day. You want to see Legion on a weird day? When you finish one of these liberation missions, you get this 2 steps from hell beat drop that sounds like it's from a different soundtrack. Fireworks going off and people busting a move in the streets as if we don't live in a high-tech surveillance state, and then it fades to black. Then, the music awkwardly cuts in again, but over the map screen this time. Huh? I didn't think video games could be on crack, but I'm running out of explanations. Another example is that operatives have a random chance of being kidnapped by a citizen who the systems have determined has a good enough reason to hate you. It makes the world feel more alive. And that's pretty much the only good thing about it. In terms of play, it's basic Legion. In terms of narrative, it's non-existent beyond the premise I've described. But for me, the big problem was that it can happen to the operative you're currently controlling. The game just freezes for a moment, then boots you into the operative select screen, leaving you to infer what happened from the term missing. Come on, Ubisoft! Right, enough cyberbullying. Side missions. On occasion, you'll find a narrative context that isn't boring, but the gameplay will always be boring. It's always the same thing you're always doing. No spins, no added challenge. It goes without saying then that we still haven't seen the return of digital trips or AR games. The most memorable of the bunch is Legion's collaboration with the UK's biggest rapper. British rap, Americans may mockingly remark, assuming that we're all refined, eloquent sophisticates like me, and rap about our credit scores or something. But little do you silly sausages know, we spit health and safety certified fire over here. Skepta, H, KSI, Millie B, Charles II. Grime is young, but it's big. And the biggest of them all is Stormzy. Stormzy is in Watch Dogs Legion. He's got a side quest and an entire song made in Watch Dogs Legion. I did not expect that. I was kind of excited for it. The thing about Grime is, it's still relatively close to Earth, the sense that its product hasn't progressed as far or as clearly as it has with other, larger rap scenes. So a celebrity crossover like this actually had some potential to improve the game's sense of authenticity, instead of diminishing it. You understand then why a part of me felt this could work, and my disappointment at how utterly fucking shameless it turned out to be. It's basically just an ad. The idea is Albion want to stop Stormzy from broadcasting his latest track, because PMCs are often brought down by rappers, so he asked DedSec for their help. And by help, I mean he asked you to watch his music video while shooting turrets. It's about 2 minutes of dev time away from just being a link to his fucking YouTube page. Nah, that's not me. But what it leaves me with are the fighting pits. And I'll give them credit. They got the presentation right. You got a great visual style, a passionate announcer, and a bit of build-up too. But ultimately, what this is a series of rote engagements with Legion's melee system. So the real question is this: how's Legion's melee system? Short answer, I'd rather have a fist fight with my own testicles. The long answer begins with the fact that it's poorly put together. Animations glitch through each other constantly, especially if there's more than one enemy fighter, and the most effective direction to dodge, forward, is some kind of Naruto headbutt that never doesn't look bad. Secondly, it's bad. You have an attack, and a guard break, and a dodge, and if you dodge successfully, you get a counter. Now, enemy combatants have their guard up most of the time, so mindless attack spam isn't going to work, which means guard break, right? Not really, because it's not actually a guard break. It's an unblockable attack that goes through their guard, but it doesn't force them to drop their guard for any meaningful period of time afterwards. It's also not something you can do very often because enemies tend to be quite aggressive. It's pretty damn hard to go on the offensive. Instead, you'll have to be responsive. You can punch before theirs land, or you can counter. The choice is nice, but it's much easier to counter. The window is essentially unmissable, and there's no trade-off in terms of damage, which means you're mostly fighting with counters, which is basically why Legion's melee sucks. It's mostly using a trivial move to watch a lengthy and unchanging animation repeat, because each operative only has one counter animation. So, 65 counters later, you've won the fight pit. Your prize is a good idea. A recruit, one of the fighters, and burrow liberations reward recruits too. Unfortunately, then there's the execution, which is marred by Legion's pitiful recruit balance. There are no situations where being slightly better at melee is worth more than having a decent gun. Fighters are useless. Same problem applies to the burrows. You might get a spy, but you might get a getaway driver. Oh, fuck me. There's also a darts minigame, and football. But by football, I mean a keepy uppies minigame. Fits the culture, I'll give them that. But what that leaves us with is the gameplay loop, more of the gameplay loop, one of the worst parts of the gameplay loop in isolation, 7 short novelties, 2 minigames, and a partridge in a pear tree. It's a depressing nursery rhyme. But hey, there is, of course, one more place to look. What about the police? Well, you still can't hack anything. You can't hack traffic lights anymore. You can't hack steam pipes anymore. You can still vehicle hack, and you can use bollards, but botnet's gone, so the trade-off between manual activation and proximity hack is also gone. You can't hide in your car anymore, and detection has changed from the phone calls of Watch Dogs 2 that you could actively prevent or escape, to GTA's instant chase telepathy. In essence, everything that characterized the police in Watch Dogs that made it feel like a hacker game, or different from the most standard implementation of police imaginable, is gone. So we're off to a good start. Now, the changes to activation mean that a large proportion of engagements with the police are 1-star chases that only happen because you went slightly too wide on one of London's narrow corners. What sucks about this is that 1-star chases are always trivial but relatively time-consuming, so the average experience with the police is waiting, mindlessly, for the cooldown to end, so you can get back to what you were doing. In a more serious chase, 2 stars and up, the police do get their act together. They can keep up with you, the drones wear down your car, and their weapons distort the controls, which is a great idea. It's much more of a challenge. In a car, the better strategy is to get out and escape on foot, which, in theory, is another great idea. London is a police state. Escaping through its complex streets plays into that notion, where blaring down the bridges would only work against it. Unfortunately, it doesn't work so well in practice. The AI has absolutely no idea how to chase you when you're not on the road, and their detection drops to Legion's characteristic blindness. You can escape most chases by parking your car and hiding by the side. or dipping into an alley and crouching, which introduces a further recruitment imbalance. Now escape perks like the living statue and the street sweeper are worthless. The moment you come to understand this, most chases become trivial and boring. But if you somehow don't, fret not, because Legion has actually managed to bring back the balance problems from Watch Dogs 1. Want to end a chase instantly? Get in a boat. It's the pirate's life for you, my friend. The police are helpless. With this you can practically cheese even 5-star chases, but that level of escalation almost never happens organically, because you have so few major offensive hacks, guns or gadgets compared to previous games. There's rarely much of a back and forth with the police. In other words, they can be repetitive too. If you want to push the combat system, Albion are fine. In any other sense, they're glowingly mediocre. And here I was waiting for the police in a Watch Dogs game to finally be able to use CTOS against me. I really ought to stop being such an optimist. And what else is there to this world? Factions don't fight anymore. Albion doesn't do anything. There are no dynamic events, either in the form of Far Cry's broad range of randomly spawning encounter types, or in the form of Watch Dogs' multiplayer, which no longer seamlessly connects to the single-player world. And in a sense, that's a mercy, because Legion's Online is an intolerably broken disgrace. But that's besides the point. Point is, this game is boring. This game is nothing. That is the point. Now let's talk about London. It's really quite something. Ubisoft bad. Am I right or am I right? Well, I am fucking right, but what I'm trying to say is that that's a vibe no one wants to be caught breaking in public, so you have to fight for a fraction of the credit their best work is due. You get smarmy videos documenting the ways they fail, but if you made the same video deliberately looking for what's outstandingly good, it'd be 10 times the length. If San Fran was made by Rockstar, no one would have bat an eye, and London, in some ways, exceeds it. There isn't a shop, or a house, or a lamppost, or a person that looks less than real. Not a fucking paving stone that seems even marginally lacking in detail, dirt, wear, and history. It's a privilege to be familiar with one of the few cities that ever had a chance of being realized in a modern video game. And as weird as it is that you can see the London Eye from Brixton, or that Legion seems to think the average Londoner hangs out in Westminster, the attention to detail is kind of astounding. Those aren't real shops, but they're exactly the kind of shops you'd expect to see in London. They're right from the signs, to the temporary notices, to the shutters, to the graffiti on the shutters, to the style of advertisement and the things being advertised. They nail the different cultures, and there's as much care put into the smaller marketplaces as the bustling high streets. The glow of the street lamps at night is correct. The sound of sirens in the distance is right. And the beep of the pedestrian crossings is the actual beep used in the real London. I can't remember the last time I logged on without finding a detail like that to be impressed by, however small, or however real it actually was. What I came to enjoy most about the setting was how the environment artists handled this game's setting in time. The future, around about 10 to 30 years. So Ubisoft couldn't just adapt, they had to invent. And it couldn't just be the future, it had to be, convincingly, London's future. And you know what? That pretty much looks the way I'd imagine a London bus to look in 10 to 30 years. And it's the same for that ambulance. And it's the same for that cab. And it's the same for most of the cars, really. Futuristic, but fundamentally familiar. All of them run on electric motors and all of them sound like it. And there are charging stations on every other street. Some cars have solar-paneled roofs. Some cars are built solely for auto-drive, but all cars are connected to the auto-drive network, as weird as it is that you'll never see anyone inside the auto-drive cars, and that you can't even summon one. There's even a cool onboard AI that tells you when you have a flat tire.
Attention, flat tire detected.
Or you've sustained critical damage. Deliveries are handled by Parcel Fox drones, and in a vanishingly rare instance of interactivity for Legion, we can make them drop their cargo and nick the dosh inside. In a vanishingly rare instance of dynamism, GBB news drones will actually show up to record footage of ongoing crimes. Advertisements and businesses account for the crypto economy. They thought of how capitalists would find more places to advertise things, and what hologram tech would mean for marketing, as high street clothing stores literally project their image, and a holo car whirls round the London lens. They thought about what the fucking bus stops would look like, and I believe what they thought of. In general, London's use of advanced technology is true to what an actual tourist city would use it for, to create civil novelties, attractions for postcards and anecdotes, like Leicester Square's musical tiles, hollow royals, whatever the fuck that's supposed to be, and huge moving sculptures that look too good to exist today but still far from perfect. If that's there in 20 years, I won't be surprised. And that's cool, isn't it? that they thought of that? And if it were just a few things, it'd be a trivial point, but it's not just a few things. When it comes to their cities, and perhaps never more so than with London, Ubisoft managed to make "they thought of everything" somehow feel like an understatement. But in similarly typical fashion for Ubisoft, they're not done yet. They've never stopped at environments. Their secret sauce, the thing that brings their worlds to life, is the life. The way people fill the streets and the markets and the estates, not just walking in straight lines with the same animations at the same speeds, but taking phone calls, stopping and starting, having conversations, talking in groups of 2 or many, sitting, leaning, lying, cleaning, begging for work and protesting what evils took their work. Alive is an inspecific and overused term, but it points to something real. We know it when it's there and we miss it when it's not because we want to believe in the setting, and London is alive. London is a testament to just how real alive is. And I'm not saying there are no problems with it. You can't take cabs or buses unless you want to steal them, and the only L train here is the L of having no trains, which really stings in a city whose transport network is so core to its identity. But if we argue about that, we'll be going around in circles. Legion makes up for it. You can ride the London Eye. The speed is right and the sound is right, because of course it is. And I'll tell you what, much ado has been made about modern gaming's obsession with realism, largely for good reason, but what Ubisoft have crafted here, through an almost unimaginable effort, is a digital space that for the briefest of moments made me feel like I was there, reliving old memories. Good ones I miss. So, if you've ever appreciated Ubisoft games for their element of virtual tourism, Legion is worthwhile for the walking, and that's something only raw graphics and detail can do. Are you serious? Learn some fucking timing, Matt! Here's the thing. There's a reason this city is often overlooked in the reviews. It's amazing, but it's likely to be a failure. Yeah, bit of a twist, huh? But you'll see what's going on. The first problem is simple. London impresses up close. It's the people and the small things that consistently amaze in this game. But from a distance, the picture can be quite mundane. Far more so, don't you think, than the Golden Gate and the deep blue sea of San Francisco. Take the time from your mindless fucking routine to have a look around, and it'll put out what you put in. But if you don't, this city so easily becomes a blur of short brown streets forgotten as quickly as seen. I wasn't a fan of London on my first run either, and it's a London problem. But it was Ubisoft's to solve, and they just didn't. With recruitment, which instead actively guides you away from the city and its people, with the Scout X app from Watch Dogs 2 that did a great job at showing you through San Francisco, with content that involved the places worth seeing, or with, the fact that this game is set in the future. So, where's Ana de Armas? Something we might see from a distance. The second problem with London is one you can't overcome by deciding to, that it's pretty much completely disconnected from Watch Dogs Legion the game, from its themes, from its narrative, from its basic premises. The distance between the space we inhabit and the story we're told is cosmic. For instance, the core of Legion is the villainy of Albion, that this is a high-tech police state, an oppressive dystopia. But is it? Really? Is that the world we see and experience? Gatherings of more than 5 people as a crime, commands a dispassionate robotic voice from one of Albion's patrolling drones. Illegal acts will be prosecuted, reads a sign. One drop in an ocean of fortifications Albion has scabbed over the city. And what do I see beside it? Active protests with loudspeakers, signs, and, emphatically, more than 5 people. There are protests on the doors of Parliament, everywhere else in London, and the city is awash with graffiti. The Albion who beat dissenters have nothing to say about 90% of the city openly dissenting? The Albion with pre-crime algorithms, nanotechnology, and a fleet of fucking death drones, in a surveillance state, can't wipe down graffiti or figure out who's put it there? If the people don't believe it, you won't either, and the people are making them look like mugs. Supposedly rife is a culture of snitching and paranoia. Really? Where? Who's looking over their shoulder? London's outside and thriving. People talk, and what they say is often intimate and treasonous, but they fear nothing. There's no fighting, no fire, no riots. The people's idea of rebellion is a collection of smug Reddit slogans. Have hearts, you fascist farts. Nowhere to sleep? Stay woke. Fuck. If I was in Albion, I'd be literally shaking right now. I've never seen a car bomb. I've never seen someone thrown into a van. I've never seen a road checkpoint scan negative. You know how many times I've actually seen them stop a fucking crime? Once. You know how many times I've seen a bullet fired? it was that same once, across 100 hours and 2 playthroughs. You aren't suddenly shocked by the rawness of factional conflict. There isn't any conflict, oppressive or resistant, besides that which comes from or centers on you. And speaking of you, don't expect to see any of that oppression yourself. You'll never scan negative. You'll never be suspected. You never have to behave as a member of a wanted terror cell in a police state. There aren't even CTOS hubs in this game that you once had to clear to access hacks in an area. So you feel less oppressed in London with Albion than you did in Chicago with Bloom. Sometimes you'll see a fascism, mostly you'll see a normal London, blissfully ignorant of its toothless strife. Which, to say the least, is a bit of a fucking problem, because it undermines the stakes of the story and the legitimacy of its ideas. And because what it also does is deny London an atmosphere. And London really could have done with an atmosphere of any kind, because when it's viewed from the distance at which the game is all too happy to keep you, it can be a bit bland. The temptation for some was to blame London itself, a fundamentally boring setting. We've proved that argument wrong, but it'd be just as easy to invite those people to ask themselves how Watch Dogs 1 made it work. You want to talk boring cities, welcome to Chicago. It had what, a cool train? Otherwise it had some grey roads and some grey buildings. It makes London look like Disneyland. What made it work was that it was part of a larger artistic direction, a harmony of the tone of Chicago, which itself was biased further towards gloom with dark color grading and a preference for moody weather, with the tone of the story, the subject matter, the protagonist, the music, the menu, the map, the HUD, and the themes of Bloom, the calculating darkness of a data-driven city, individual elements that evoke the same emotion that amounted to an art direction, an atmosphere, which in Watch Dogs 1 was a technological neo-noir dystopia, present-day cyberpunk, black and code, cold and dirt. Then it was the lie of life in Silicon Valley, where you played the coolest clown in a diverse circus, in the vivid brightness of San Fran, where the UI was itself made like the minimalist UIs of modern tech companies, and the map was Noodle Maps. You see what I mean? Those games felt intensely because of the strength of their art direction. I'd argue it's among their most enduring qualities. And then we got Legion, that has art but absolutely no direction. London doesn't portray a tone, with Albion nor with weather, and it's part of nothing. But that's only because there's nothing to be a part of. The story is tonally confused, the protagonist is undefined, and instead of committing to the punk aesthetic that London fathered, the menu is a vaguely futuristic red, the map is a vaguely futuristic blue, the icons are bland yellow icons. Instead of centering the aesthetic on the game's core conceptual enemy, as Watch Dogs 1 did for Bloom and 2 did for Silicon Valley, Albion nor CTOS informs Legion's style at all. Instead of taking influence from the setting's musical history, as Brian Rietzel did for the first game, and which in London could mean everything from grime to rock to the classics, we got vaguely futuristic action soundtrack number 2486. And what amazes me most of all is that Legion has actually made an effort to distance itself from the smaller aesthetic details that made Watch Dogs unique. When I open the profiler, no lines of invisible connections spew from my phone, reminding me of the world I inhabit, and this is the loading screen. Inspired. Our phone, meanwhile, besides being a see-through piece of glass, is no longer interactive, so we summon things from a radial wheel instead. There's no music player, no song sneak, no Scout X, things that before strengthen the franchise's technological themes. And despite being set in a technological future, what replaces it is nothing. That's my point. Watch Dogs Legion doesn't just play like nothing, it feels like nothing. And what drives me fucking nuts is that it's not an accident. It tried to. It made an effort. And unfortunately, the themes of Watch Dogs did not escape Legion's black hole of character unharmed. Here's the thing, I've always kinda liked the ideas Watch Dogs was founded on, a technological dystopia not of the future, but of today, that specifically fixated on the evils of data technology. What does it mean for that much information to be in the hands of so few? It means an invisible blackmail empire can make true dissent impossible. It means privacy becomes a myth people tell themselves to feel safe. It means the beginning of the ability to accurately predict the future. What trends will emerge in economy and culture, what someone's gonna do before they've done it. Most importantly, what they're gonna buy and what laws they're gonna break. In a profit-driven world, it means the company with the data can sell those who'll pay an oracle. These ideas became the foundation for a deeply evocative hacker fantasy, as Aiden's CTOS backdoor gave him the powers of Bloom. We saw everything, invaded privacy for fun, stopped crimes before they happened. In a sense, we embodied the critique. which isn't to say Watch Dogs nailed it. Its narrative was an unfocused mess whose technological concerns were background to a bland revenge story. It tried to critique pre-crime while accidentally making its pre-crime algorithm 100% correct, 100% of the time, exclusively on crimes that no one would dispute should be stopped, which kinda misses the point. I'm not gonna tell you Watch Dogs was a work of genius. I am gonna tell you that it successfully drew a lot of attention to a catastrophically under-discussed and deeply relevant issue, that its ideas were interesting, and more than that, unique. Truth is, I was concerned that Legion being set in the future would make it less unique, that it would just become generic cyberpunk. But it made sense after 2 games set today to look ahead to the endgame. Data tech in a world where storage is no concern, processing algorithms are perfected, and AI makes better decisions than humans. What would Bloom become? Well, I don't know. Legion has no answers, it doesn't even ask. CTOS and Bloom are only present insofar as their existence is acknowledged. Otherwise, Legion uses the future as an excuse to do whatever the hell it wants with tech. And what I'd love to tell you next is that yeah, okay, it's lost its relevance and its originality, but for what it is, it's an insightful work of speculative fiction. What I'm actually going to say is lol, lamau. This isn't a cohesive vision of the future, it's a high-tech theme park where the influence of any one concept or company never extends beyond their part of the park. What better example is there than Albion, an ideologically zealous PMC backed up by unprecedented technology, and with it, they've achieved Jackie fucking Chan besides getting their dicks knocked off by a parade of uppity Redditors. Comprehensive nanotech exists, but the only thing anyone's thought to use it for is an invisibility cloak. Bloom hosts an AI superintelligence called Bagley, and the only thing it's responsible for is driving the cars.
Auto drive now enabled.
Let me repeat that. They have highly capable general AI, and they're using it to drive cars. And no one questions this. Optics are a new line of mandatory mobile computers that interface with the optic nerve, but at no point will you ever see evidence of someone using their optic, and no one seems to care about the proliferation of perfect AR technology. Broker Tech, meanwhile, has successfully invented digital consciousness, which will fundamentally change our relationship with reality itself forever. And no one gives a shit about that either. Nothing is affected by the invention of several earth-shattering technologies, except for the Amazon drone deliveries, which have put some people out of work. It isn't even trying to think nor to criticize. It's pretty hard to make a statement when nothing visibly exists, to talk pre-crime when we can't see it happening and we can't use it ourselves, to talk privacy when half the mechanics that allowed us to invade it no longer exist. Okay, so Legion smokes 10-foot pole at being speculative fiction as well, but what about its individual exploration of the technologies it shows interest in? Now here's a plot twist, because we're actually onto a winner. Legion's brief foray into digital consciousness is probably the best thing it does in its entire runtime. It all starts with a mystery call from a hacker collective on the dark web, who want us to look into the secrets behind Sky Larson's latest creation, Project Daybreak. Because of course, DedSec, a group founded to oppose the misuse of modern technology, need to be told to look into the most significant technological development in human history. And a strictly anonymous dark web hacker would communicate on fucking FaceTime with no attempt to mask her highly distinctive accent.
I give the contracts. That's all you need to know about me. I'm nobody. I'm Nout.
No, come on, stop bitching. Okay, so Nout, her name is. That's it, girl. Make sure everyone knows exactly what part of England you're from. Forces us to spend an hour jumping through hoops to gain her trust. Oh, I've done it again. Probably shouldn't mention that I glitched into a building either. Okay, so then we're sent to break into Sky Larson's crib under the pretense that what we find in there will make us want the same thing as Nout. Not to stop Larson, to kill her. Okay, my interest is piqued, and it's almost what you'd expect from a tech genius, clean, intelligent, stone cold. We take the elevator down to the basement, and what we find is something that does not belong in a basement. The alarm bells are ringing. Why the fuck's there a house inside a house? Have we been uploaded? It's pretty, but it's too pretty, too sweet, and the reddish tints are sending signals of their own. The strangest part is, Watch Dogs Legion is letting a story unfold through the environment instead of blurting it out on a screen, and it's attempting something as creative as horror. You can take things at your own pace in the garden. There's a dog's grave, Ada, and a memory in CTOS of Sky and her sickly mother. This is a recreation of their family home, meant to comfort Sinead, but what she sees is a monstrosity. Inside, the AI insists on giving us a tour, assuming us to be Sky, which is weird. Why would Sky need a tour of our own home? Doors open for us, memories play, and Sinead grows increasingly hostile to Sky's suggestions that she upload herself. She knows what Sky did to Ada. The ambience is exquisite. A low hum, digital barks, and the repeating sound of metal paws tapping helplessly against a cage.
Specimen name, Ada. Species,
Border Collie. Neural upload status. Alive and well.
That's what's guided to Ada. It's chilling. So we understand Sinead's stern refusal, but as the house AI stumbles over its words, the dots connect. She's here with us now. She's the fucking house AI.
Perhaps you would like to go upstairs. Many memories. Upstairs.
She knows you're not Sky, but she can't say it. This tour is her own horror story, guiding you to understanding, to an off switch, in the basement, where recordings show us her digital lobotomy. We watch as she wakes up in darkness, with nothing but the knowledge it was her own daughter who put her there. And we watch as Sky butchers her mind into the shape of a servant, never to see or touch or rest again. It's the voice actress who deserves much of the credit here. The despair she portrays as Sinead is sickening.
Reserve the limbic over now. The emotional response is fascinating.
And as the house AI, the slightest of those tones are hidden in her voice.
Sky, you have not worked in your lab for quite some time. I'd like to update you on some of your more crucial projects. Please come downstairs when you're ready.
And it's unsettling before you understand, and horrifying once you do. Like a dream where you scream at the top of your lungs but no one can hear. This isn't Soma, but it's pretty fucking good. I was disturbed. It works as Black Mirror cyberpunk. It's got a coherent theme, but theme or not, it's conceptually interesting. It even makes sense that this would need to be set in the future. And yes, I am telling you all these things because this is the exception, not the rule. The moment we get into that elevator, Watch Dogs backflips off the heights it climbed, shits itself on the way down, and lands with a wet splat.
You knew what was down there already, didn't you?
Yeah. Her mother begged me to... I just couldn't.
Nout is a hardline moralist and a very tough woman, but she let Sinead live in unimaginable pain with no guarantee anyone else would pick up this contract because she just couldn't. Yeah, I'm gonna need some explaining on that one, Ubisoft. She was right about one thing though. I do want to kill Larson. And what's cool is we're actually given a choice, which almost makes up for the 2 minutes of hacking minigames it took to get here. But here's the thing, if you choose not to kill her, nothing changes. An intelligent, driven, and profoundly evil psychopath is now immortal, and nothing changes. Now it'll give you a call to tell you to suck her dong, but about 5 minutes later she's back on the phone trying to apologize. Yeah, all that was for nothing, but feel free to do more 404 contracts. Ah, there's the Legion I know. We're back in business, boys. Each of Legion's remaining questlines likewise are about one specific villain. The PMC, Albion, the crime syndicate Clan Kelly, and the British intelligence agency, SIRS. My first question was, why? Why in a Watch Dogs game set in the future, are we focusing on things that exist today and have no inherent connection to technology? I imagined that the answer would be that Legion would explore the ways advanced tech might change these organizations. I was wrong. Mary Kelly's microchipped organ slaves makes her job slightly easier. It doesn't mean she can do something that she couldn't do before. It's the same thing for SIRS's supercomputer and Albion, for whom advanced tech is a minor convenience. Nothing they do is predicated on its existence. So the villains we fight in this game have no thematic connection to DedSec or Watch Dogs. Albion could just as easily be the big bad of a different franchise or a game set in 1980. That level of thematic disconnect isn't normal, and it feels like there is something missing from the story because of it. So what we're left with is a gang heavily involved in trafficking, a tired concept that Watch Dogs has itself already done before, spies, which, yeah, okay, spies are cool, and Albion, who amazingly aren't even about the thing they're about, private military companies. Though Legion theorizes that profit-driven policing would create an incentive to promote crime instead of prevent it, it can't apply that critique to Albion, because they're not profit-driven. They're uniquely ideological and they do want to prevent crime. And so what you get is a representation of nothing. Nothing like Albion exists, and there's no reason to believe something like them might exist in the future. Oh, and they're nationalists too for some reason. You want to know why they're nationalists? It's because it makes them look worse, because it lets Ubisoft use the word fascism, which sounds good in a trailer. Sounds serious. What Albion really are is a vague collection of bad vibes, relevant from a distance but meaningless in focus. Why? Because Ubisoft don't want to be caught saying anything anymore, even by implication. They don't want the franchise predicated on the stance it took on a relevant issue to say anything anymore. Well, here's what I want to say. This is bad on principle. Mainly though, it's bad because from almost every angle, Watch Dogs Legion is conceptually boring. Its ideas are boring. That's one of the narrative's biggest problems. Without a theme connecting our quest lines besides the fact that they're bad guys and we're not, every pressure is placed on the plot to justify our conflicts, to give the story focus and direction. And if you remember back to the start, that plot is the mystery of Zero Day, which isn't a very compelling mystery. But worse is how little effort Legion puts into making the connection to Zero Day believable.
Takes a sick mind to come up with killer microchips.
Perhaps a disease mind, but definitely an ingenious one. Perfect psych profile for a group like Zero Day, wouldn't you say?
Mary Kelly's evil, and Zero Day are evil too. In the spy plot, a mystery caller claims Zero Day are a rogue cabal of SIRS officers, and that's actually a decent hook. But it's back to bullshit with Larson.
Worth the risk, in my opinion. She seems like a real DedSec fan, and I'd certainly rather have her as a friend than an enemy.
If she isn't with Zero Day, she might know who is. And if she is with Zero Day, it's probably a trap. Either way, we'll have new information.
Legion is strung together by grasping at the straws of a boring mystery, so I move on to the next quest because it happens to be the next quest, and that's a structural failure. When we zoom in from the bigger picture and bring the moment-to-moment of the campaign into sharper focus, the problems seem almost endless. The plot, for instance, often does itself serious damage by fixating on minor details that we simply can't care about. The life of an agent who we don't and won't know until the fucking DLC. The life of a journalist who likewise is a complete blank slate until a campaign that isn't this one. Nout's series of contrived hoops. The engineering details of a drone. A recording. Some data. The major problem, though, is what I'd characterize as absence. This is very much a campaign you have to criticize on the basis of what isn't there, just as much as what is. One of the things that isn't there is character. The protagonist is incapable of fulfilling the function of a protagonist. They can't change, they can't even direct the story according to who they are, because you could be playing as anyone, and they could be introduced or removed from the story at any given time. So it's like I said, boring is the best they can be. Then there's Sabine. Sabine provides exposition. Then you've got the supporting characters like Nout. There's one for each quest, and their purpose is to be supplementary Sabines. Hamish is Nigel Cass's protege. Caitlin Lau's been working Kelly's case for years. Nout has serious mental problems. So each one of them is strongly invested, but they don't do anything once you've brought them into the fold besides telling you what to do next. And as for the villains, they're hardly in the game, so it doesn't mean much that they're all one-dimensional too. What I came to realize with time was that the villain problem isn't restricted to the figureheads. It seemed more like an antagonism problem. We never lose, we never face a consequence for something, we're never surprised or confronted by any real difficulty. And as if Albion had any credibility left to falter, it continues to undermine their menace. But eventually, I came to see something far simpler and deeper than that. It's just a drama problem. It's a lack of the lifeblood of story, a scene where two characters want different things or where anything we care about is at stake. There's a reason the end of the Kelly quest is one of the only cutscenes I can remember. It's because Caitlin realized that arresting Kelly wouldn't stop her, so she had to choose in that moment between her big case and the lives she's convinced herself she's there to save, between the law and what's right. Boom, drama, for a fleeting moment. There is so little like that in Legion. To some of you, it might sound like I'm repeating myself, because this was basically what I said about Watch Dogs 2. A lack of consequence, a toothless villain, and Watch Dogs 2 actually had a theme, so there was far more to be undermined. Watch Dogs 2 also had a problem with empty characters. I still have no idea who Marcus Holloway is, but Watch Dogs 2 had a good story. How? Well, it helped that it wasn't conceptually boring, and that its two dramatic scenes had some measurable impact, but mainly, it was the raw fucking magnitude of its personality. Wrench, Sitara, Josh, Marcus, even Dushan as the villain, they all had spunk. And watching them bounce off each other like pinballs, both physically and verbally, was entertaining to the point that every cutscene was an anticipated moment, including, and perhaps especially, the exposition briefings at the hackerspace. I dreaded them in Legion, I honestly put them off. And I appreciate that Legion's tone couldn't permit such exaggerative characteristics, but you don't need to be a clown to have engaging character interactions. I'm just saying it would have been nice if they were all in the same room, instead of plainly gesturing on Zoom meetings, or if those characters weren't flatter than the fucking screen. Bar Nout, every one of them is guilty of spunkless behavior. It's like Caitlin Lau was designed in a lab.
Since the bombings, they can grab anyone off the street. Call them illegal immigrants, potential DedSec insurgents, whatever. Though we know who the real danger is.
Holy shit, sister, do a fucking flip or something. Instead, Legion has to outsource its personality to its smarmy British twat of an AI, Bagley. And as a leading expert on being a smarmy British twat, I'd say he's pretty good.
Oh, I'm Malik, and I think I can analyze SIRS dossiers faster than Bagley, but my idea of heavy security is automated proxy jumping. Please.
Trouble is, it gets repetitive. There's only so many ways to sarcastically mock a handful of narrative contexts, but he just never shuts up. The snark is so unrelenting that it starts to create more tonal problems than it's worth. If you're playing with permadeath, an operative will die, and Bagley will immediately proceed to make light of their death and the next operative's chance of survival.
Again? Sadly, that operative has gone on to the big safe house in the sky.
Do you want me to care or not, Ubisoft? It happens with character deaths and any manner of darkness in the story too.
We can't let this go!
I'd love to listen to you moan all day, but perhaps investigating her murder would be a better use of our time.
The question's why.
Well, they're being sorted for information about Malik, of course. I thought that was obvious when we saw that meeting where Emma Childs said, and I'm paraphrasing, kidnap someone and torture them for information about Malik. Nothing left to do now but take a few selfies with the corpse. Quickly, though, security's on the way.
Bagley is responsible for more exposition than even Sabine, and having half the game relayed to you through a mocking, unserious personality has a pretty major effect on your ability to care about what's happening. Now, the second best quest in Legion is Sirs, the spy one. It's an exception to some of the problems we've mentioned. It's got some twists, it's got an active villain who seems competent and makes DedSec work for the win, but it's still not that good. It goes to show that even when Legion makes an effort, there's only so much it can do when it's bound to the Legion gameplay loop. This game is so repetitive that it can't even organically create a difficulty curve for the campaign, because every level is more or less the same size. So what it has to do instead is force you into combat scenarios against increasingly difficult waves of drones, which solidifies the combat character imbalance, shockingly, isn't very fun, and largely fails, because there's still the other 90% of the time which is still too easy. In Watch Dogs 2, you could at least look forward to the odd set-piece moment. In Watch Dogs Legion, you can look forward to the hacking minigames, which haven't mechanically evolved since Watch Dogs 1, and not in space, or in a Leviathan server farm, on a wall, in a building, for minutes on end. Oh, and speaking of the spy plot, we can't move on without mentioning how fucking dumb it is. Malik wants us to believe that he's in extreme danger for his knowledge of Zero Day, that we must therefore observe the utmost caution. So, what we do is meet in person, in public, in among the most recognizable parts of central London, in a surveillance state, twice. Don't stand up when we meet, he urges, but it's fine if we're visibly having an argument 30 seconds later. And here's this gem.
Jesus.
If we don't get Malik soon, we might just lose the entire bloody hemisphere.
Ah, gets me every time. So that leaves us with the ending. Albion goes down when we leak their involvement with the Zero Day bombs to the public, and Cass locks himself in the Tower of London, where he says villain things.
My inevitable reign, and your downfall. This is how it will always end. The natural order of people like me and people like you. I am the Lord.
And fights us in a giant robot that can't move, that isn't even the fight. The real fight is a hacking minigame and some goons. Then he dies.
Let's get this over with.
Time to end this.
Oh no. Anyway, Zero Day. With no build up to their return whatsoever besides the fact that you've ran out of main questline so now they kinda have to return, Zero Day returns during Albion's unwelcome home party. Their goal? To stop you from texting your nan.
Texting your nan.
No, seriously, it turns out they're anarcho-primitivists. They want to wipe the world clean of modern technology, and they're running a hack called Rule Britannia to do it, which we trace to their secret bunker. A bunker that's locked with a Zero-Day profile picture sequence challenge. Ah, there is one thing that never gets boring. Yeah, at this point Legion has completely given up. Inside is an absurd series of look how crazy I am tunnels, the environmental equivalent of I am the law. And at the end, Zero Day psych ward / gaming setup. They've gathered each of the technological conveniences that featured over the course of the campaign, in order to delete the source code. And yeah, they're missing pretty much all the genuinely important technologies from the world Legion has established, but we're way past asking those kind of questions. Want to know who Zero Day is? Well, it just so happens they've saved evidence in the form of a pre-rendered cutscene on their laptop. It was Sabine.
Impressed?
No. I'll hand it to him. The sense of climax does come through on the race to Bloom Tower. Sabine's using Bagley to turn CTOS against London. Cars run wild. Themis rains hell down on random civilians. For once, a problem in Legion actually feels real. And dodging those cars like a GTA Chaos mod is as mechanically engaging as this ending's gonna get. It's 2 more evolutions of the Legion gameplay loop. One at Brokertech, one at Bloom. The view is sublime, but it can't distract from what we're here to do. Our final boss, fighting waves of drones, and a hacking minigame. A really, really long one. We find Sabine at the top, taking pride in her handiwork. This does mean she was at the tower the whole time and did nothing to stop us, but hey.
Fuck. You just can't get enough of me, can you?
She explains herself, and for the first time, Watch Dogs confronts itself with a question. In a world this far gone, is it enough to be a watchdog?
Optics are glorified cattle tags. Albion shoots civilians in broad daylight. Snitching is now a means of survival. No, you skids can't fix anything.
It's in the context of this question that setting the game in the future makes sense. When so much time has passed and things have only gotten worse, what does that say about watchdogs-ism? When things seem hopeless, which in relation to a technological dystopia is an increasingly relevant real-world concern, what will we do? Turn to nihilism? Acceptance? Extremism? Political action? Or just keep doing what we were already doing in the hopes that things will change? What a theme this could have been. If it had existed before this very moment, if the world Sabine describes was the one we inhabited, if Legion didn't respond to this question with, being a watchdog is good because watchdogs are good, and then chucking Sabine off a building.
How's that for wiping the slate, bitch?
Sabine dies as empty a character as anyone else. We'll never know who she was before Zero Day, what made her change, or why she seems to almost enjoy the prospect of killing you. There isn't so much as a text file or an audio log. And the fact that her plan doesn't make sense either seems almost irrelevant. Is it possible to reach this point in the story, still willing to engage with Legion on that level? Unless Big Saba's hack wipes out literally every form of advanced tech on Earth, which it doesn't, how exactly is it going to wipe the slate clean? Did she kill the researchers who invented it too? The textbooks, the ideas, the stores of hardware? In every country on Earth? And if our master plan was more about sowing distrust in tech, which, let's face it, is just cope, didn't Raymond Kenny do that in 2003? And didn't it not change anything? But of course, it does Legion no favors to acknowledge that the first 2 games existed. After Bloom Tower, we're switched to an operative in Brokertech to shut down Bagley. The game's going for a heartfelt goodbye, so it pretends Bagley has been an actual character or expressed any emotion at all before this point. But it doesn't matter, because after the credits roll, he just comes back. Of course he does. The side missions still need someone to deliver exposition, don't they? So of course his consciousness and processing capacities can fit on a CTOS drone. They didn't even let his death sit with us for more than 1 minute. Oh man. And that's curtains on Watch Dogs Legion, the impossible game. It's not one of the worst games I've ever played. Its mechanics are shallow and empty, but there's no crippling fundamental flaw in any of them. And yet, I am more appalled with Legion than with any other game I've played in recent memory. Because it's not the first attempt of inexperienced developers to break into the genre. It's the sequel to Watch Dogs 2. The world was there, the mechanics were there. Copy and paste was the bare minimum. Better was what I expected. Why did we get a lobotomy? Originality, fantasy, challenge, variance, depth, insight, atmosphere, charisma, drama, all gone. As if by surgery, as if by intention. That's impossible, isn't it? What happened? Why? I have a theory. It's that, much like Battlefield 2042, Legion was originally meant to be a different type of game. In this case, an MMO. Hence the name Legion and the concept of building a large resistance, rising up against a simple bad guy that can be and do anything. Maybe that's why recruits exist who make no sense if they can't be active at the same time as others. Maybe that's why the mechanics are so simple, because mechanics have to be simple to handle and coordinate in match-made co-op with randoms. Maybe that's why the enemies look like that, dressing up in gang merch, Power Ranger cosplays and colored pajamas that can immediately be recognized and communicated in a multiplayer environment. Maybe that's why they have health bars, and everything's so repetitive. Maybe Watch Dogs 2 didn't make enough money, so Ubisoft wanted to try something different, but like 2042, they realized their mistake and switched back. Maybe that's why Legion is so fucking empty, why its campaign is short and yet still stretched out, because the Legion we're playing was made in far too little time. Maybe I'm wrong. If I am, then I'm lost, because this game can't be the way it is. But after a few days of vacantly wandering through the scraps of post-game content remaining, my shock finally turned to apathy, and I quit. And then a year passed, And then, things changed. When I returned to Legion for a second playthrough, there had been more than a few updates, most of which were content drops for one of the most unstable online experiences that I've ever played, but one of which was a new mode for the single player, Resistance Mode, which promised to be harder than hard, have permadeath on by default, and a few further changes to enhance the experience. It was those few further changes that struck me first. Albion checkpoints automatically scan negative, which means you have to drive around them, which on occasion wakes you from the mechanical stupor of following the GPS, and makes a surprisingly strong improvement to the sense of Albion's threat. It was similarly valuable that Albion drones and guards were automatically suspicious. I had to be careful, and when I wasn't, it was bullets that struck me, and now they hit hard. And that made a seismic difference. Death was something that happened, and death was something that mattered, both because of permadeath and because if you run out of operatives, your save is wiped, which made death something I very much wanted to avoid, which further improved Albion's legitimacy, and most of all had a staggeringly vitalizing effect on the gameplay itself. I wanted to avoid combat. Tougher detection made that harder to do, so stealth regained a degree of tension, and a motive to hack things. This won't change that there isn't much to hack, but things do feel more like Watch Dogs as you often hang back and have the world fight for you. So is stealth good now? Well, sometimes it's not boring, and sometimes it's less generic, and that's a win I'll take. By far the most significant benefit though is the benefit to combat. You can't trade damage anymore, which means positioning matters, which means the design of the arena itself matters. You want to be somewhere with exits, you don't want to be cornered, you want to be covered from all angles. What's particularly impressive is that the effort Legion put into enemy design now matters, an effort classic mode entirely undermined because nothing they could do differently was likely to make a difference. But when a second can separate life and death, invisible captains are more than a dismissible novelty, they're a refreshing challenge. Likewise, bitch-seeking spider bombs encourage a new response, and even drones make a difference. You can't damage trade, so their ability to fly towards you is important and worth playing around. What's important to understand is that these things more closely resemble a binary than a spectrum. You didn't need to care about what direction the reinforcements were coming from in classic mode, nor was it worth dealing with particular enemy types before others. On resistance mode, you do, and it is. My favorite part was that escape had become a relevant dynamic. I thought about my exits in stealth in case I was detected. Sometimes I even left a fast car nearby. I retreated in combat as often as I advanced, and if I was chased out onto the streets in search of an advantage, another faction would often get involved. Albion would arrive and a fight might engulf a whole street. One instance of action wasn't always constrained to one arena anymore. More shit happened, more shit mattered. You know how I know? Because I can remember. Anecdotes had returned to Watch Dogs. That time when I killed half the enemies in Mary Kelly's mansion by running them over near a bus stop. Or a moment as simple as rescuing a hostage in a random Albion base for a random recruitment mission. It was hard, and it was tense because it was the difference between losing 2 operatives or gaining them. It's here, in the context of high difficulty and permadeath, that Play As Anyone finally makes a positive difference, that Legion does something no other Watch Dogs could, because in no other Watch Dogs does it matter if you die. And it's not like these highs are consistent, it's not like Legion is fixed, but Resistance Mode makes the most of what's here. And I had fun. That's a binary. The benefits to recruitment are almost just as diverse. The combat character imbalance is soothed somewhat because of the greater pressure to avoid combat. Bias towards experienced people is essentially solved because, with a high chance of death, you don't want to waste your strongest recruits on menial tasks. And because, with a high chance of death, your strongest recruits will probably die. Which means nearly everyone in London is worth something, if only to keep DedSec's numbers up. Which in turn has a positive effect on activities that reward recruits. Fighting rings most of all, because melee is now so much safer than gunfights. If you want to avoid committing backwards vehicle hack IRL, just make sure you're prepared for those drone waves, because difficulty spikes on resistance mode are now difficulty mountains. With that concession, this is easily the best way to play Legion. And speaking of backwards vehicle hack, ladies and gentlemen, the canonical death of Wrench. It's no secret the Legion's biggest update was the introduction of prestige operatives. Wrench and Aiden's return with the Bloodline DLC might have generated more online hype than the game itself, a testament to 2 things. 1. The perception of Watch Dogs and Aiden himself as being underappreciated and worth celebrating. And 2. How off-putting the notion of a blank protagonist really was. Darcy Clarkson could only benefit from that second one, so it was a testament of its own that she garnered almost just as much hype as Aiden. A modern assassin, a notion that fans of Assassin's Creed had been anticipating since 2007, and unlike Bloodline, this quest was free. So let's find out if it was at the very least worth your time. Well, The beginning of the assassin quest is predicated on a signal emitting from a strange drone. The thing is, I've yet to actually see this strange drone on either of my playthroughs, which has consistently left me confused as to what the hell anyone's talking about. Apparently, the drone makes mention of assassins and Templars, so DedSec comes to the entirely rational conclusion that because there are no references to them online, they must be groups as ancient as time itself and are therefore worth investigating.
Agree.
Which you do by driving around London, scanning more drones, and listening to audio logs. It's a rare thing for the biggest problem with dialogue in a AAA game not to be the writing or the voice direction, but the quality of the acting itself.
To hell with safe. If our ancestors could go up against the Templars on their own, then so can I.
God, I am sick of hearing about what heroes Jacob and Evie Fry were.
Darcy, if you're not going to help me defend the tomb, then don't get in my way. Don't follow me, don't do anything. Goodbye.
I am stunned that this was allowed to make it into the game. It doesn't even sound like they know each other, let alone that middle-class Mark and fucking tax accountant Tabitha are hardened assassins who've waged war in the dark to serve the light since birth. It turns out her actual name is Darcy Clarkson. She gets in touch and asks for help saving her dipshit brother from Albion. She pretends that there's some kind of exciting difference between how DedSec and the assassins operate, that you'll be the hacker while she does the infiltrating, but it really falls flat in a game based around instant kill melee takedowns and not hacks. What you do hack is a cutscene, and what almost seems like a parody of a Templar named Graham says childishly evil things because Assassin's Creed lost nuance to its chronic case of franchise dementia about 7 entries ago. At this point you're sent to the Assassin Tomb from Syndicate as Darcy. It's a beautiful environment, a nice callback, and it even contains a decently challenging puzzle. In Legion. But then you have to do parkour. In Legion. It's imprecise, sterile, and far outstays its welcome with an Orb of Light collectathon that's mechanically outdone by Aidan Pierce's cash run. Then the vault opens, and hidden inside is the suit and weaponry of a modern assassin. What? How? How'd it get there? Who made it? Most of all, why doesn't Darcy so much as react? Predictably, the mustache-twirling Templar shows up and you get to try out your fancy new hidden blade. With his death comes the characteristic memory corridor. It looks really good. However, these used to be contextualized by the Animus. There's no Animus. I suppose it's too much to ask for Ubisoft to stay true to their own fiction. The real problem, though, is that without an ounce of exaggeration, this is some of the worst writing I've ever seen in a Ubisoft game. First, Graham makes fun of your outfit.
You know, the whole hood and robe look hasn't been in for a few centuries.
Fair enough. Then, Darcy says this.
Perhaps you don't understand what's happening here. I've killed you. You're dead.
What? Yeah, being a Templar, I think he's probably aware of how this works, Darcy. Then, Graham calls the Brotherhood mean names, and Darcy tells him to watch himself. Watch himself? What are you gonna do to him? You just killed him. You just said so, remember? Graham comes out with more playground insults and Darcy walks away.
You want my advice? Find better people to fight with. Shouldn't be that hard.
Then the mission ends, and making absolutely no mention of her brother, Darcy agrees to join DedSec.
Let's go hunt some baddies.
If you've bought the season pass. If not, that'll be $15 in Watch Dogs coins, please. Oh my God. I actually pay my employees in Watch Dogs coins, so what do you get for your $15? Well, the Hidden Blade doesn't really mean anything in a game where every operative has access to zero-cost instant melee takedowns. But she does have the edge in melee combat, where her guard break becomes an instant kill, which is a valuable advantage. Unfortunately, Darcy is an operative who suffers from animation fatigue, and watching the same one play again and again and again really sucks the life out of the experience. The hidden gun, meanwhile, is loud, remarkably weak, and can only fire one bullet before it needs to go through a lengthy reload. No, you can't swap her weapons. The Berserk Dart is useful and so is the Disguise, but it won't change the fact that Darcy is therefore worse as a stealth character than anyone who can use the Silence P9 pistol, and worse as a combat operative than anyone who has a gun that can fire more than one bullet. She's decent, at best. And can I just say, those frills on the outfit, they do not work, girl. Losing Darcy on resistance mode because I didn't know how the disguise mechanic worked felt entirely appropriate. So, make the smarter choice. For the same price as Darcy, you could buy Watch Dogs Legion Bloodline, the expansion, the game Legion was meant to be. Maybe even the best Watch Dogs content ever created, if you believe what they say online. Truth is, Bloodline is overrated. So long as it was competent, it was always going to be overrated because it's standing next to Legion. It's not that I don't understand. It is refreshing to see content that doesn't make a point of regularly embarrassing itself, that isn't empty, whose cutscenes feature dialogue and voice acting that aren't overtly terrible. But I'm not going to praise it for that. I'm just going to praise it for what it is. Hardly a masterpiece, but undoubtedly good. Aiden's got a job. He doesn't want it, but he does want to see Jackson again after all these years, and both of them are in London. Good start. The job itself is a mixed bag. Bloodline does the cliché exposition thing where we learn the details of the job about 3 seconds before the job, and inside's not much better. There are 2 types of people playing Bloodline. One of them is people who've only played the first game, and for their sake, we're taught how to unlock a door with Legion's mechanics, how to hack a panel, how to throw a punch. It's forgivable because it's necessary, but unfortunately, it exists in the context of the rest of the level, which is unnecessarily dull. The environment is bland and linear. The combat can't show its improvements against so few enemies, and the evil company's shenanigans are unremarkable as evil companies go. The level's kinda boring as shit, but then, your prize is stolen from you. It's the man, the myth, the Muppet, Wrench. I really like the way our control is delayed at the start of the chase, so we're forced to just stand there watching as he gets a head start. The chase works though, because it's Aiden and Wrench. Aiden's serious, Wrench is a Muppet, which makes for some very entertaining dialogue. It's a contrast as old as comedy itself, and of course, it's just nice to see 2 largely enjoyed characters from previous games interact. Bloodline gets a lot out of the investment we already had in Watch Dogs. It happens again when Wrench kicks Aiden's ass so hard it almost feels disrespectful, and Thomas Rempart, the man whose prize was just stolen, threatens to kill Jackson Pierce if we don't get it back. That gets the story going. That's the momentum Legion never managed to find. And you might think, do we actually care about Jackson? But there's a strong filter built into Bloodline's existence. If you're willing to track the post-launch of a game like Watch Dogs Legion and pay $30 to play as Aiden Pierce again, it's a safe bet that you like the first game enough to have some investment in Aiden's relationship with Jackson, to believe there's more to Aiden than the dull, generic tough guy he was dismissed as at launch, and to be on board with what Bloodline is trying to do, to dissect, confront, and play with Aiden's character in every way it can. It's a safe bet that Bloodline's narrative foundation is strong, and that's no small thing. I was engaged enough as Aiden rushed to Jackson's defense, and Bloodline rushed to meet its goal. Jackson doesn't want Aiden's help. He comes here bullishly inflicting his way of life again, as if after all this time he still thinks breaking into his nephew's home, even nicking his fucking cookies, is an acceptable thing to do.
But you're in danger. No, not this time.
So, unsurprisingly, Jackson tells Aiden to fuck himself, but then, on account of his earlier dick flattening, Aiden dies, bringing out Jackson's lingering sympathy, which was perhaps one of the most natural ways to make Jackson's willingness to reconcile feel right. Things are looking good, this reunion's being handled well, but Aiden might just wish he was dead, because what the fuck is that? I might be prepared to accept it if Legion had suggested at any other time that people in the future dress like lunatics, but it didn't. So, what? Why have they done this? Fuck me. Right, yeah, the game. So, Jackson leaves without a kind word spoken, but then he immediately offers Aiden help. There are seconds separating these events, and it just doesn't work. It's a good conversation, though. Jackson reveals he helps Connie, who you won't remember from the main game, with organizing protests. Aiden protests. That'll get you killed, he says. The good guys have already lost. And Jackson doesn't disagree. But some fights are worth losing. I really like that. Indeed, this is a second crack at Legion's theme. What do we do in a hopeless world? Aiden's age is used to embody that hopelessness. He's given up on making a difference, and he explains as much to Rempart, that he won't fight, because it'll only lead to a cycle that never ends. In this way, Bloodline even confronts Aiden with himself, and because he represents Watch Dogs as a franchise, and what it means to be a watchdog in this universe, he is able to serve as the perfect vehicle for these games to look at themselves in a mirror. The setup is brilliant, but I'm going to reserve my praise for the execution. Until then, we've got a lot of game to get through. Connie introduces you to Freddy, and from there, a network of DedSec contacts have all got something for Aiden to do. We've got a new coat and a new gun. So let's take it for a spin. How does Aiden play in Watch Dogs Legion? Well, he plays like John Wick, which to some of you might seem strange. That doesn't sound like the Aiden we played in Chicago. And true enough, for most people, it wasn't. In its raw state, Watch Dogs was a standard defensive cover shooter, a good one, but Aiden's low health and limited means of protecting himself encouraged a highly reserved playstyle. It was only through extensive experimentation, particularly that of one Visceral Carnage whose gameplay compilations now have a combined 2.6 million views, that revealed that something far more assertive could emerge from Watch Dogs' combat sandbox. Slow-mo for protection, a liberal use of Aiden's vast explosive arsenal, and his instant kill takedowns in combination made kind of stunningly cool shit possible. It certainly wasn't easy to do, but fuck, it was really fun. And from there, the identification of Aiden with John Wick came naturally. He was on a single-minded quest for revenge, in an underworld of secrecy and darkness, driven by the loss of someone murdered by gangsters. Because of those viral videos, or in spite of them, Ubisoft made the same connection. In Legion, Aiden is John Wick by design. He has new takedown animations, he can access them more easily thanks to Systems Crash, a visually dull but mechanically serviceable replacement for the first game's Blackout. And because he now exists in Legion, which means more health, the AR cloak, and Hack Disrupt. He has better incentives than before, because he can't use slow-mo on demand anymore. Instead, it's accessed only in the moments after a gun takedown, so you want those gun takedowns. Aiden's John Wick for everyone now, which is a good thing because Legion is fucking boring, and as we've established, aggression is the only way to make it not boring. But that doesn't mean he's anything like he used to be, both because he exists in Legion, and because of the changes Ubisoft made to make him more like John Wick. Having no control of slow-mo sucks. It massively reduces potential to do things you couldn't otherwise do, or to make things look cool in ways they otherwise couldn't. Those are the inherent problems. Then there's everything else. For reasons beyond imagining, when you use focus, your aim is fixed on center mass, and it takes a hard yank to pull it off and start aiming freely. That's what creates the jerking you can see on screen. Needless to say, this does not make you feel cool. Being forced into a disadvantage for no reason is annoying, especially so when an enemy's center mass is stuck behind an impenetrable object, as it often is in cars. What a mess. Aiden's second perk is Gunslinger. This is new. You reload at the right time, you get a damage boost, and after a few minutes of practice, it's really hard to miss. Which is also annoying because it comes with an annoying sound effect which is now almost always there. And because the best way to optimize Aiden is now to shoot a wall, then begin the fight with your guns preheated. And that's Aiden. He's not finished, and much less than he used to be. Which I think is doubly significant in Legion, because there's a good chance you're playing Bloodline after Legion, and ultimately, Aiden plays very much like the Hitman, or any strong fighter who you chose to play aggressively. And I expected this, but that doesn't mean it's not a shame. Don't expect anything from mission design either. We can thank our gods for the absence of line puzzles, but beyond that, this is almost entirely standard fare Legion. So what I'm about to say next might be hard to believe. That Bloodline's side missions are really quite good. Not because they play well, but because they're written well. Freddy, Connie, Angel, and Claire are well-written characters who are interesting and fun. And it's striking, truly, the difference it makes to have plot, stakes, and basic conversation delivered through a human being who cares about what's happening, instead of an all-seeing passionless snark machine. But if we do our best to look past the flattering light Legion shines on Bloodline, the true strength of the writing is the contrast of these characters with Aiden, in belief, interest, or humor. Freddy finds Aiden's American bravado and self-seriousness amusing.
You can't leave them behind either. I get it.
Aw, see? Who needs a therapist when you got a middle-aged cowboy in a trench coat?
She's light-hearted and slightly careless, but not to the point of being a wrench-like caricature, or to the point of being annoying. She's having fun with Aiden, and as he does his best to navigate her unique blend of having no idea what she's doing and having an answer for everything, we have fun with her.
So, who should I be expecting?
Auto drive now enabled.
Kelly. Surprise.
What? You just had me rough them up.
The quantities of entertainment Bloodline gets out of bouncing light characters off Aiden's bottomless pit of edge is honestly commendable. Rescuing Freddy's friend, who turns out to be her 70-year-old mum, who turns out to be one of Aiden's hacker idols, who turns out to be a really harsh driving critic.
Watch the fucking road!
Is one of the most entertaining side quests in Watch Dogs, and it's a testament that that can honestly be said when the gameplay is some driving and infiltrating the same small level you've infiltrated multiple times before. Aiden's relationship with Connie is taken much more seriously. Connie is fighting because London needs fighting for. Aiden's fighting because he's getting paid. One of the better missions involves a fucked up resistance op that Connie desperately needs Aiden's help with. But Aiden's done his part. That was the deal, so he haggles for better pay. Connie can't spare it, so she pleads. But Aiden won't budge, so she gives in. And Aiden gets his money. Please Aiden becomes a running theme, and though there are problems here, that's drama. Good drama. One of the smartest choices Bloodline made was to have quests delivered in chains, which allows our relationship with the quest givers to evolve over time. Connie wins Aiden over, slowly and naturally. Freddy likewise becomes a friend. We're able to get attached, to varying degrees. Angel is the weak link of the four. The least interesting quests, the least interesting character. But there's something to his philosophical debate with Aiden. Angel doesn't believe in killing, Aiden disagrees. And this amounts to an actual moral choice at the end, along with mutual respect for each other. There's also something to knowing Angel is going to die. He's the agent I mentioned earlier, the one we didn't and wouldn't know until now. Claire's that journalist. And it does add a certain tragedy to their stories, which often regard the very things that get them killed. Angel's idealism and Claire's naivety. There are weaker missions amongst the set, but when I look back at Bloodline, I remember the idea of the binary. I had fun. I even caught myself wishing that there was more. And that brings us to the most important contrast Aiden's got, with Jackson, which might be the best thing Bloodline does. It's only a few conversations, slowly, awkwardly, naturally had over the course of the campaign, but it's enough.
That weekend you took us all out to the country, when I was a kid. And on the way we got run off the road.
I don't want to talk about this.
About what? About the crash or about my sister? Look.
We see the anger Jackson holds for Aiden, and the love. We see how badly Aiden needs Jackson's forgiveness, and how hard he finds it to admit that not everything he did was for his family, even to the point of lying to himself.
We don't need the money.
I don't always need a gun either. But when I do, I'm glad I have one.
Listen to yourself. You took the job because you love getting into gunfights with assholes and talking like that.
That's not true.
Yeah? What are you doing right now?
Getting distracted.
It's human. It's organic. The writers get a lot out of what's unsaid too, like the timing of it, that this is one of the first things Aiden says to Jackson after their initial reunion, or the fact that it comes out of nowhere, like it does for those things people desperately need to get off their chest.
Look, I don't know if you're listening on this channel right now, but in case you are, I just wanted to say, the only reason I took the job that started all this is because it paid well enough so that I could set up you and your mom forever.
In this light, even the fact that it's done with radio calls instead of cutscenes has its benefits. It's natural for someone who fears a conversation to choose a distant medium, texts over calls, calls over face-to-face, and I don't doubt the intention behind it was cost-saving, but hey, it works, doesn't it? So their renewed bond satisfies, both for the sake of the reunion and as justification for Aiden moving along his first character arc, ungiving up. That theme ends up being the focus of Aiden's relationship with Wrench, too. Some enjoyable comedic lines aside that never fail to make me lol out loud when Aiden's forced to repeat them, the meat of Wrench's presence all comes down to the moment Aiden has him cornered. Wrench knows he can't win this fight, so he resorts to explaining himself. Rempart fucked him over, sold him on a dream, a road to a better future if he came back to corporate work, but he lied. He can't get away with this. He shouldn't be allowed to. Rempart found Jackson, so Aiden has no choice, but he can see the man he once was so clearly in Wrench here. That's everything he used to believe.
For what it's worth, I spent my life fighting people like Rempart. Doesn't work.
So what? We're all supposed to just give up?
No, you shouldn't. Some fights are worth losing.
Whoa there! Okay, Bloodline. Strong drama on the level of character and themes, elevated by two exceptionally good performances, but mostly by how well Bloodline set this up. Aiden's cynicism and his renewing connection to hope, through his renewing connection to Jackson and London's resistance on the ground. The simple fact that it comes from Aiden. It lands. It delivers on Legion's theme for the first time with a message, and I think it's a good one. In spite of the liberties it took, Watch Dogs was always trying to talk about the real world, but it couldn't continue doing that if it wasn't eventually willing to admit that impossible people like Aiden and Marcus who can't and don't exist in reality aren't a true path to change. The idea that things are going to get worse in spite of our actions in previous games was mature, and allowed Watch Dogs to hold on to its relevance. The idea that we can't give in, even if we lose, is something real that you and I can hear and relate to. It's nothing new or profoundly intelligent, but it's worth saying. And it marks Bloodline's midpoint, and it marks Bloodline's high point. We've got the broker bridge, we're off to get Jackson. Rempart's an interesting villain, mostly in the sense that he's profoundly uninteresting and yet a pretty good villain. He's an entitled, sniveling rich guy who seems almost deliberately generic, but he is also as organic and human as anyone else in Bloodline, not constantly dispensing predictable declarations of his villainy, but instead negotiating with Aiden, learning from Aiden, and making no apologies just for who he is. He's nothing special, but he does work despite the archetype. I looked forward to his calls. That is, until now. Wrench couldn't let it go. He replaced the real broker bridge with a bomb, and he blows Rempart's face off with it. So Aiden and Jackson have to fight their way out together. Wait. What the fuck is that? What are you doing? Oh look, it doesn't matter. He's not the only one with drip problems. Rempart comes back with a fucking metal face, and the only thing you'll get from him now are predictable declarations of his villainy. That's a loss, but the mission's a win. Aiden has to teach Jackson how to fight on the fly. Jackson doesn't instantly transmute into a badass. He's scared and needs reassurance. But he isn't useless either. He can assist you with hacks during combat, so the dynamic succeeds for the time it's there. The centerpiece of the mission is the fight against the Rempart robots, Bloodline's new enemy type. It's an unflinching metal robot with a fucking minigun. You don't damage trade, you take cover, but it's always walking towards you, which alongside its energy blasts that ignore cover, keep you on the move. Playing defensive outside of resistance mode is a fresh dynamic. Now, the more it attacks, the more it heats up. You can speed that along by shooting or disrupting it, and when the bar fills, the core exposes for a limited time. That's when you do damage. If you make the most of the opportunity, you can kill it in one phase. So in the context of a fight with other enemies, it's all about making sure you have the time and the space to get as much out of that damage window as possible. You can time your hacks and shots, you can leash it into a smarter position, you balance staying away to avoid being fried, and keeping close to begin the counter-frying as soon as possible. In this way, or by simply acting as a roadblock to your typical aggression, the Rempart robot mixes things up nicely. It's a pretty good enemy. I'm impressed, and it's good that you'll occasionally see it in side quests too. Anyway, then Aiden dies. Again, and on account of it entirely being his fault, Jackson makes sure Wrench sticks around to help unkill him. So, how does Wrench play in Watch Dogs Legion? Well, thanks to Gunslinger, Aiden is strong even by Legion standards. Wrench, on the other hand, can only use weak shock weaponry, so the contrast is immense, and that's a very good thing. Besides the refreshment, this essentially accounts for Bloodline's reasonably satisfying difficulty curve. Okay, but is he fun? Yeah. The game again figures a way to keep a defensive character moving. In light of his weakness, melee takedowns become more valuable, and thanks to his quickly recharging flashbang ninja balls that make them much more accessible, he's got a good incentive to stay close to the action. Beyond that, Wrench also has Lady's Smash, an AoE attack with a very long wind-up in which you're completely vulnerable, and that lands with the incredible force of not much damage and some hacks. Okay, Ubisoft. Let's just agree that didn't happen. Because Wrench makes up for it with Sergei. Turns out, the one way to make a cargo drone not excruciatingly boring is to strap an EMP missile launcher to it. It's pretty fun in the open world, and pretty useful in fights. You can't just ride Sergei into battle. He doesn't have enough health or do enough damage. But if you leave him in the air, you can quick switch to use his EMPs for an assist on the ground. A much more interesting arrangement. It's not only something fresh and fun to master, but it's also something decidedly hacky, which, in Watch Dogs, is welcome. Wrench is nothing special, but he is fun. That's 2 for 2, Bloodline. Alright. So, how does Wrench story in Watch Dogs Legion? Well, I have my issues. This motherfucker rustled my jimmies. And I know rustling jimmies is kind of his whole thing, but on the player's end that's meant to be charming. I found it charming for a time, but it's not always very funny, and the goofball routine literally never stops. The writing gets repetitive, the delivery gets repetitive. Bar one, the stories don't deal with his character because that would get in the way of the jokes. And it eventually becomes impossible to believe anyone could interact with him without immediately writing him off as a psychopath who ought to be fighting Batman in Gotham, not grounded villains in a grounded world. Wrench has become a parody of himself, which largely sucks. But it does have its upsides, the main one being the contrast with Geordie. Geordie was the first game's Wrench, an actual for real psychopath, who was light-hearted by Aiden's standards but highly pragmatic nevertheless, so dealing with the gale force absurdity of this game's Wrench gives him a headache. And that actually does get pretty funny. On more than one occasion. Geordie goes on to become Wrench's side quest giver. All 3 of them count among the best in the game, thanks both to some remarkably inspired concepts, which include an invisible car, Legion's second race, and the closest thing we've seen to a set piece, but mostly thanks to the success of the character dynamic.
Like when you get a migraine.
Oh, I've never had one of those.
Really? Try talking to you sometime.
When you're done with Geordie, Wrench unlocks a final mission. It's another reunion, this time with a man himself. He's blue, he used to be you, he's kind of a Mary Sue. It's Marcus Holloway. The bitch is back, ladies and gentlemen, and by back, I mean he's on the other end of the phone. But that's enough. It's a pretty good mission. Basically a Watch Dogs 2 nostalgia tour, with Devon v Devon and a Cyberdriver throwback. And if you feel anything for that game like I do, it's hard not to come out with a smile on your face. I admit, it confused me that Ubisoft chose to have Marcus contact Wrench, both because it seems awfully convenient, but also because there was setup for the writers to do something with the roles reversed. It's established that Wrench's shame at leaving DedSec for Rempart is what's kept him from calling Marcus back after all these years. So, now that he's come so far, met Aiden and Jackson, fought back against Rempart, even stopped him in the likely case you play this post-credits, why not resolve Wrench's shame by having him pick up the phone, forgive himself? It's not quite the resolution it could have been, which honestly, I might not have cared enough about to mention if this was just a DLC to a Watch Dogs game, but it's not. Bloodline, in spite of its encouragement to never give up, is the ending to Watch Dogs. It never says so, it wasn't sold on that premise, but when you play it, you know what it is. Revisiting all the characters we knew, all the goodbyes, the theme that seeks to resolve Watch Dogs at its core, the story that resolves its central character. Bloodline ties off every loose end. This is goodbye. Knowing that, or at least feeling it, characterizes the entire vibe of this DLC. Adds a sadness to things because I liked Watch Dogs, and because it's sad to know there's potential that'll never be met, but it also adds a happiness to what it wraps up well, to know that before it bled out, Watch Dogs got to be good again, to realize, or to remember, that somewhere in the thing that is Ubisoft were people who cared. I know this seems so divorced from concrete reality, from anything I can prove, but this feeling is part of Bloodline, irremovable from it, and it wouldn't be as good or as bad as it is without it. Unfortunately, Bloodline is bittersweet for two reasons. The second is that it's not just a heartfelt goodbye, it will also become a reminder of why Watch Dogs had to die. The decline in quality is slow. Wrench learns that the only way to bring Aiden out of his coma is to work with Sky Larson, use the broker bridge to enter his mind and lead him back to reality. They're using the world to tell a story again. That doesn't mean it's a good story. But like I said, slow decline. Things do start strong. It's the Pierce home from Chicago. There's an eerie silence. Too many balloons. Aiden interminably digging his own grave. The unsettling atmosphere is strong, but then you're sent on a fetch quest for Aiden's hat and coat, and things take a turn for the worse. It goes on too long. The visuals become too repetitive and too divorced from anything we can interpret as an element of Aiden's character. This is guilt. The guilt for Jackson's missed birthdays and the birthdays Lena never had. This is just vague creepiness. It doesn't mean anything. And what doesn't help here is how dumb it can be.
Who are you? What are you? Because you can't be Lena. My sister died when I was little. Is this some kind of sick joke?
I thought you were meant to be a PhD student, Jax. You know we're in a dream. But perhaps the strangest creative decision made down here is to start and end Aiden's second character arc, lifting the guilt of all the lives he's taken, washing his wet red hands. Okay, are you sure, Bloodline? 'Cause at no point until now, in even the slightest terms, was it suggested Aiden feels any such guilt, let alone for it to be so crushing that his solution is to die. It's an interesting idea, but pulled from thin air. And that's not even the biggest problem. The biggest problem is how we solve it. We bring Aiden his hat and his coat, and we tell him that he's more than a killer, to bury the fox, not himself. So he doesn't. That's it. He's fixed. If Aiden truly does feel guilt for killing the people he's killed, you'd imagine it'd be a pretty deep pit, not something he could recover from with some clothes and being told to get over it. But we're in his mind, you see, so everything we do here is somehow more significant. Unfortunately, just because you have an in-game rationale for the existence of a character arc cheat code doesn't make the use of a cheat code a satisfying way of developing character. Aiden hasn't changed, he's been changed. He's been hacked. So he comes out a pacifist, Aiden Pierce a critic of murder, and we're supposed to believe this is natural, and I just don't get it. We went into Aiden's mind as Jackson, and we walked through Aiden's guilt for what he did to Jackson, for putting his life in danger then and now, for getting his sister killed, and in Bloodline until now we've had a strong arc of reconnection pushing towards forgiveness. But instead of saying, I forgive you, for me and for Lena, Jackson is the one to forgive Aiden for something he has no place forgiving him for. Why the sharp turn, Bloodline? It doesn't ruin Jackson and Aiden's relationship because enough work had already been done, but Aiden's newfound pacifism is underbaked to the point of comedy. The best part is that he still plays like Aiden, with the most lethal toolset in the game unless you force him to equip shock weapons. And that's not to mention the fact that in the likely case you've got resistance missions remaining, your rewards are things like an AK-47 and a light machine gun. What happened here, man? Right, the game. Let's finish it. Wrench asks Aiden whether Geordie is a genuine psychopath, moments before professing his intention to murder Thomas Rempart while cracking bad jokes and making stupid voices. He's so far over the line at this point that his light has begun to fucking redshift. Then, it's time for the final boss. A giant robot that can't move, that isn't even the fight. The challenge here for me is, once again, convincing you that what I'm saying is actually true. This encounter begins with all the menace it can muster, but the boss won't attack you for the first 30 seconds of the fight. You just sit there, awkwardly staring at each other, and occasionally fighting waves of human enemies. Eventually, it busts out the missile launchers, along with robots and far more human enemies. Balancing ad control with boss damage becomes genuinely difficult. But since boss damage is a matter of mindlessly spamming your 20 fucking round assault rifle for minutes on end, the challenge only serves to drag that out. It's embarrassing, then it's excruciating. And then there's what happens next. Wrench confronts Rempart, who reveals that all his talk of reaching the stars was a lie, as if asking to be killed. But the hammer comes down and Rempart lives, because Aiden said killing is bad. Oh, it's an illogical decision made on the basis of a moronic conversation had 10 minutes beforehand. It's got the emotional satisfaction of being slapped in the dick with a salmon. And that's how Bloodline ends. I really thought we were past this. Well, I hoped, but it seems Legion is a disease. What a shame. The good part is that Bloodline survives it. Its disastrous ending doesn't wash out the strengths of what came before, and this DLC spent far more time good than bad. I'm sorry, Legion. Watch Dogs still goes out on a high note. If you return to Wrench's hideout, Aiden will say his goodbyes to Geordie. His surprise at Aiden's newfound sentimentality is the only good thing that came of it. And if you're done with the Resistance missions, that's it. This is still Legion's open world, so there's nothing left to do. But many players had vocally resolved to go back to the main game and play through it as Aiden or Wrench. I was among them, and the results may shock you. It didn't fix Legion. It's impressive that they wrote so many new lines, some of which are actually pretty good, but it's just not good enough. It's immersion breaking that no one acknowledges someone as significant as Aiden Pierce, or when he emotes like Joe Public fresh from the streets because the animators assumed that's who you'd be, when he claims he's against killing, then murders Nigel Cass, or the simple fact that he's in Legion, so he can't be his own character, only a gruff paint job for the unquestioning DedSec operative, which, contrasted with Bloodline, is also immersion breaking. His combat isn't good enough to fix the gameplay, and given his aggressive style, he's also incompatible with Resistance mode. There is no cure for Watch Dogs Legion, and we're at the end of the line. So, I guess I'd better write a eulogy. I'll say this, few games have grown on me with time quite like the first Watch Dogs. If I were to critically reassess it today, I'd come to the same conclusions. Time won't change a campaign more focused on breaking into a run-down apartment block than anything that made the story interesting. It won't fix one-button hacks, copy-pasted side content, or police that could be fooled by entering a boat. But so much of the hate towards it arose from broken expectations, a context that time has degraded. Now, what stands out about Watch Dogs isn't what it doesn't do, it's how nicely shot the cutscenes were, how creative the characters, and how engaging the dialogue, in spite of the dull story they told. It's the digital trips, the best of its side content, that took the game and got it high and have never been matched by any Ubisoft game since. It's how fucking good Brian Rietzell's soundtrack was, the combination of innovative techno synths with classic Chicagoan jazz, the way the soundscape captured the data theme, with alarms and rings and muted conversations. It's the art direction, its bleak, mechanical, inviting darkness, and how effectively it harmonized with the city, the story, and protagonist, amounting to a thoroughly engrossing neo-noir tone. You could almost hear a gruff detective's narration of a losing battle between hope and corruption. Most of all, it's that I really like playing it. Time hasn't just revealed but made popular its potential, which, as it turns out, is pretty damn high. Fighting in the streets amidst the cold downpour, slowing time, hacking the world apart. It's not an experience you can get elsewhere, and it's one I greatly enjoy reliving. Watch Dogs 2 is a different matter, because you don't have to look past a launch disaster or deep cutting flaws to appreciate it, because it's fantastic. It made the hacking deep, it gave the story focus. San Fran was a joy to explore and intone, because it improved its progenitor, but it was also its own thing, which is the best thing a sequel can be. It had problems, had plenty of them, but it deserved better than what Ubisoft had brought upon the name Watch Dogs. A public cynicism, a widespread doubt. For some, a will to see it fail. I suppose then, for some, Legion was a pleasant surprise. But Watch Dogs deserved better than Legion, and for Legion to have ended everything it could have become. Watch Dogs deserved better than to be made by Ubisoft, and it deserves to be remembered for more than its failures. Thank you for watching. Special thanks go to L. Hudson, Lex Williams, Andre Baltuta, Holy Shift, Dennis Williams, Combat Wombat, John Lemley, Shade, Dylan Schaefer Murphy, Warthol, The Last Great Opium Den. I joined Tier 3 because I wanted to hear Whitelight say this out loud. Dan Walker, Newts, Nathan, Caleb Finnemore, DJ, Chino, Chase Baker, G. Series, William Vosseler, Joe Simmons, I Pay My Cam Girl So Why Not You, Navy Husky, Save, MT the Poet, Deluxo, Calvin Black, Dr. Pavel, The Wayfinder 12, Carlos Skibber, John C., Corey Walterbeek, Hidibari, Anton, Floyd Dibben, Storyteller Max, Monochrome Only, Rollo Runner, Ethan Seach, Jack, Connor Fraser, Brybase, Milo W, Jason H, Purple PP, Instvent, Joshua Lovejoy, Vincent DeLuca, Veda, Cole Bramlett, Seraph, Essel and Beneful the Doggo, Vernet White, and Lubos Thomas.
Actually, yeah. Yeah, actually, that'd be great. So wait, are you on the street or are you in a car? You're in a gray fucking car and you just drove by. Alright, so we found a bit of a flaw with this system then. I can tell every NPC puts on their turn signal, but players do not. Well, I didn't get you, but like I see you. I'm shooting at you right now, am I not? Yeah. Well, you've left my sight now, so you can properly fuck me, but be warned. And I won't use a grenade launcher. Did you win? You weren't in the car? No fucking way!